Yeah.
Hello.
Do we get that live on air?
No. I wish we had. That was brilliant.
That was a pretty good intro, actually.
So, hello and welcome to the Fresh Air Sci-Fi Show. I'm Joe.
I'm Dave.
And I'm Philip.
And tonight I'm already confused and bewildered and I have no clue what's going on, which is probably a good thing considering that I haven't actually seen this movie in many years and haven't had time to watch it in between us deciding we were going to do it. So I'm just going to discuss the concepts.
Yeah, if you remember the basics of the film, you're
fine. I think you're good. You're good. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you were unaware, we are going to be doing a film review, and it's a bit odd to do a film review on a film that is so old, but we felt that there were some philosophical concepts in there that we could discuss, and actually if it was something that everyone out there was everyone was interested in, it's something we could bring to the table and do more often.
I'd love to do it more often if people wanted to.
Oh, most definitely.
It's just fun, yeah.
Yeah, it's fun, yeah.
I mean, even when we started doing the Fresh Air Sci-Fi Show, we did two films. We did Fight Club. The Fresh Air podcast. We did the Philosophy of Fight Club and Philosophy of the Matrix. And unfortunately, I spent hours and hours and hours editing the Matrix one, and then it only saved 2 seconds of it. I've still got the original files, but I was just like, I can't be bothered to do that again. But the Philosophy of the Fight Club one was up there, and that was really entertaining to do. It would also be fun to maybe have some clips and things like that when we're talking about relevant pieces. And I mean, the other thing that I'd be quite interested in doing in the future as well is, like, you know, those audio tracks that you can get whilst people are watching the film, and you can sort of discuss the things and go along with the film. That might actually be something sort of like a live watch and discussing things as they go on. Although, if any of you have ever watched Mystery Science Theater 3000, that was one of my favorite shows when I lived out in America, and it's absolutely brilliant. I could just imagine.
Sorry, Mystery Science Theater.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. I can imagine the three of us as those little robots. So, I mean, that would be absolutely fantastic. So, tonight's film is The Truman Show. So, Dave, do you want to just quickly cover off what The Truman Show was about?
It was the precursor to reality TV. It kind of was.
Pretty much was.
It appeared way before actual reality TV. And I'm sorry to anybody who hasn't seen the film, but it's about to be spoiled because, you should have seen the fucking film by now.
It's Philip's fault if you haven't, though.
Yeah. Exactly.
He went back in the past and wiped all the tapes. It's basically Jim Carrey is living his life in this small town, and it turns out that he's actually the star of a reality TV show where people watch him 24 hours a day, and all parts of his life are directed and planned and filmed. And as the film goes on, he starts to become more and more skeptical of what's happening around him, and eventually breaks free from this TV show.
There you go. That's the entire film.
Yep.
We're done. Have a good night, all.
It's kind of amazing.
I didn't say the catchphrase.
It's kind of amazing that someone watched that and went like, yep, that's a very good idea. Let's do it. And then made reality TV.
Only they picked the worst people. They picked like Housewives of Orange County.
That's true.
And the people of Big Brother, the people on Big Brother are nowhere near as good as Truman.
This is
I
definitely
never
true.
watched.
But then the people on
reality
Big
TV,
Brother
so-
know that they're aware of it. No, I don't. I watch it. I watched the first season of Big Brother because it was something that was new, and after that,
I wanted to see, how it played out. But
Yeah.
no, it was awful.
After that, I
Awful.
pretty much hated all reality TV. Occasionally, a friend would show me something. I think there was one that I watched a couple of episodes with him to the Jersey Shore or something like that, the American
Oh
one.
God, yeah.
I mean, that was absolutely awful and so overplayed, and people actually playing up to the camera. It was like fake reality TV, which made it even worse. Like, there wasn't even any reality to this.
I think all reality TV is faked, to be honest. Like, when you see clips of it, it all just feels very forced and false.
Yeah.
Can we play up to the camera?
Yeah.
So, Dave, where should we start on this journey of analysis through the Truman Show?
Start at the beginning. If you think about the concept, it's sort of like Descartes' evil demon. So is his name Christoph? I can't remember. I watched it this afternoon. I forgot his name, but the
Yeah.
director of the thing is called Christoph.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you could kind of imagine him as the evil demon. He is controlling all of Truman's perceptions. Maybe not like the actual physical smells and what he sees, but how he sees it and the world that he exists in and who his friends are and who his wife are. Everything, he is in control of everything like that.
So there is an overarching evil demon. Now, does everyone out there remember when we've discussed the evil demon before? If not, Philip, do you remember enough about the evil demon to explain it?
Oh, yeah, I think I can do that. So, I mean, the evil demon is a thought experiment, whereby you have to imagine a sort of evil demon. Oh my god!
Joe basically is the evil
something.
demon.
Yeah, exactly. Let's take Joe as an example. Let's say that Joe is the evil demon. He has the ability to control everything about how people perceive things, and so the idea here is basically you really can't concentrate. I'm sorry, I have a hard time. I guess it's basically
sorry.
looking at skepticism. No, go ahead. That's great. Yeah.
That's all right. They're all off. They're all off. I was just messing around.
Okay, I have to recollect my thoughts now. Okay,
That's
basically.
well, whilst you're doing that, yes, Luke, it is different to Laplace's demon. Right.
Yeah, it's basically if he can intervene in all of your perceptions, this demon, how can you know that what you perceive is essentially real, more or less? So it's a form of it's a thought experiment that's related to skepticism. So you could imagine this demon interfering and producing everything that you see and you perceive, and then the question is, how would you be able to distinguish this perception that is fake from what's actually out there? So yeah.
So
I think you feel free to add everything that I'm missing, Dave.
No, that's a perfect summary.
Okay.
So Dave, I mean, this particular demon, what did it lead us, or what what did it lead Descartes to think?
It led him to strip down all of his beliefs down to the only thing that he could sort of presuppose without any question, which is that he exists. And his solution to it was to argue that God is good, essentially, and God wouldn't let him be deceived by this evil demon, so therefore his perceptions must be reasonably accurate.
Yeah, unless God has a good reason to do that.
Yeah. And that's why Descartes' answer wouldn't work for Truman. Because, he can't say God would stop me from being deceived, because he obviously was deceived.
Yeah, most
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah, but I think
Oh no, it doesn't work as an answer to Descartes.
Yeah.
Completely separated.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it does sort of bring us round to thinking about, you know, his entire world was fabricated, you know. The only thing that really was true was the fact that he was thinking, and therefore he is. And he began to start doubting as well, and stripping away his constructed reality.
Yeah, because it sort of takes something from Daniel Dennett there with the brains in a vat, where Dennett argues that you couldn't keep the brain in the vat illusion going for long enough because systems would break down, there would be faults and glitches and things like that. And that's sort of what starts to happen in the Truman Show. People who want Truman to break free start to do things like drop stage lights from the sky or parachute in and say, Truman, you're on a TV show.
Yeah.
In fact, they were doing it from when he was very young, weren't they? They were, you know, they'd come out of Christmas presents and be like, you know, you're on a TV show and so on. And it was really, really difficult for them to maintain the illusion for as long as they could. But even then, as a child, when they were trying to rescue him, it was almost impossible for, you know, there were so many people telling him it was real versus these random odd experiences. He's going to believe the majority, and he's not going to necessarily have the critical thinking skills there to actually fully address. His reality is the only reality he has ever known.
I think that's one of the lines that Christoph says, something similar to that. Something like, people simply accept the reality that they exist in.
Oh, yeah.
And that's generally the case, yeah.
I think that's true. I mean, that's why you tend to adopt the customs and rituals and religions of wherever you grow up as well, isn't it? Because that's your reality. That, as you grow up, that is your entire world. And it's not until you know, go much broader and investigate the rest of the world, you realize that, oh, hang on, this isn't the same for everybody. Not everybody thinks the same. Maybe I can think a little bit different.
I can't. I'm not smart enough.
It's lucky you were right to begin with.
Yeah. But that's that it's a really good point, that in that a lot of skeptics today will say, well, you have to show me evidence. Unless you can show me evidence, I won't believe something. Well, the world that Truman existed in, he was told that this person was his wife. He had memories of getting married, and, you know, there's all the evidence that he was married. So when these other people show up and kind of say, well, this isn't your real world, which ones are you going to believe? Are you going to go with, well, maybe I am on TV? Because that doesn't seem kind of possible, especially if you're sheltered in a world where all of TV is shows like I Love Lucy.
Yeah. I mean, it's also fair to point out that at least the occasions in which they showed break-ins were all when he was very, very young, like a child. So
security got better.
I mean, I don't expect him to be able to analyze the situation as a kid that is barely able to walk, honestly. So, it's not surprising that he didn't register these things.
Yeah, and even when he got older, like the spotlight falling from the sky, it gets explained on the radio almost immediately.
Yeah.
So of course, he's not going to question that. It's going to be, oh, so that's what it was.
Yeah.
Which you would do.
Yeah.
And it does sort of give you a parallel of sometimes when something weird happens, and it makes you think, well, hang on, was that really what it was, or was that a government cover-up? And I know it can make some of us a little bit more suspicious when there's such a fast explanation for something like that. But at that age, especially when you're younger, you wouldn't necessarily, have those thoughts. And if you grow up constantly in that bubble, you're not going to question them when you're older either, because there's always been a fast explanation. There's always been these...
And those odd, weird things, yeah.
Yeah. It's not like if tomorrow sort of I woke up and one of my walls completely blue screened and I went, what the hell? I've got a digital wall? Like, oh my God. If I'd grown up with occasionally walls blue screening and it's explained by some freak electrical storm and and there seemed to be a perfectly rational explanation, I would grow up accepting this. And, I wouldn't engage my brain in the same way, because brains are lazy. They build biases. And if you've already got the answer that you've been given loads of times as you're growing up, you don't think about it as much as an adult. Whereas if it happens for the first time as an adult, you're like, that don't sound right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But also, like, he doesn't have any other world to compare it to.
No.
Right? So it's basically,
exactly.
that's all he knows. Like, that's another thing that I thought about watching this. Like, how far could you push this? Right? Like, could you actually build a world that is complete? Because they like in the Truman Show, they built a world that is pretty close to what we would experience, right? Like, it's very similar. In some respects, it's pretty much identical, other than the fact that, everyone is an actor and
product placement wherever you go.
Product placement, and there is a set essentially. But other than that, it's meant to mimic real life. But I think it's interesting to think about, like, how far could you go? Could you go with this? Yeah, could you convince him that he's living on some other planet, or that, I don't know, that plants are supposed to be glowy objects and stuff like that?
That was the only thing you'd ever experienced.
Yeah, because if you go to school and everyone teaches you that, it's completely normal that there are these weird plants that are camera shaped, right? Like that it's just another species of plant, and how far can you get away with it? Like, I think that's a very interesting question.
It is. Or like, say, you're the last town surviving after a nuclear strike and there's a bubble around you. That's why you can't leave.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That too.
So Luke actually says something. He's obviously joking, but he says, so was he delusional or mentally ill?
Yeah, that's another thing.
That's... And that's kind of something I want to touch on later when we talk about contextual knowledge.
Yeah, me too.
That's fair. I mean, Luke, we'll come back to that one later. You'll just have to stay tuned in.
He's a goddamn eager beaver. Coming in, jumping in, spoiling the conversation.
Yeah.
I won't say his other comment then. But it's interesting to think, as you say, like, how far could you push it? I mean, how can I apply it to certain things within my reality? When we were kids, for example, there used to be adverts on TV and everybody watched terrestrial TV. These days, people watch things like Netflix. Kids are growing up without having to wait for a show to start or have advert breaks or anything like that. And I've noticed both of my kids be more impatient with the TV if we're watching something. Say if we've put YouTube on and an ad break comes on, or they actually go round someone else's house and they watch terrestrial TV. I mean, I haven't had terrestrial TV for about 20 odd years, I think. But all of a sudden their reality is like, what the hell is this? I don't understand it. And it's kind of like that. And another point that you brought up earlier about, the evidence. Evidence is a complicated one, because sometimes you can actually have real evidence that proves a point but is actually false.
Definitely.
I don't know if I've told you guys about my friend from Romania, who basically all of her documentation was lost in a house fire. And all the legal records show her as being 1 year and 1 day younger than she is. There was a mix-up somewhere, but her birthday is wrong by a day and a year. So she's legally a year younger than she biologically is. And it's close enough to the fact that there is no way you could actually go, well, no, you're not 60, you're clearly 30, or vice versa. It's just 1 year. It's really hard to pinpoint a year in a person with current technology. So all of the evidence she has proves that she's not the age that she actually is.
Yeah.
So
and that's basically the whole of the Truman Show. All the evidence points towards him being married, especially from within that context. But he was never married. He could show you all the evidence and everything, but that evidence would lead to something that was false.
His entire life was a lie. He just didn't know it was.
Yeah.
And
everyone else did.
Yeah. But he was rational in everything he believed, even though he was wrong with pretty much everything. You know, there might have been certain things like I breathe air that, you know, he was right about, but his entire world was a construct, and he was completely rational to believe it was real.
He would have been irrational to believe that all of it was false.
Yeah.
I mean, if somebody came up to you and said, I think I'm living in a TV series,
Yeah.
you turn around and go, okay, mate, I've got the number of a good psychologist.
Yeah. But that's the funny thing about the show, right? Like a lot of the times when he reacts in certain ways, you know, as if you think about yourself and put yourself into that situation, looking at him, right, and imagine being deceived with him, perhaps, you know, what would you think about him reacting that way? What would you say to him? Because I think very few people would actually, you know, think that he's got a point, right? Because he talks like a crazy person.
That's it.
At certain
if
points.
you were put in there with him and brought up with him and didn't know all of the facts surrounding it, you would have turned around and said, Truman, I think you're starting to get mentally ill, or...
Yeah.
But he wasn't.
Yeah.
So he would sound mentally ill.
And he looks it in the film when you see him breaking down and starting to try and race his car out from the thing. Yeah.
His reality is shattering. I mean, you see this when really fundamentalist theists have the walls broken down of their reality, and they start, you know, if they're inerrantists and suddenly seeing the errors in the Bible and actually going, oh my God, or oh my not God. But it's quite a traumatic experience. They're starting to see things that they'd taken as literally true. Now they could justify it as, oh, maybe that's a metaphor, and you know, they wouldn't necessarily be an inerrantist anymore. They would start having a metaphorical approach and maintain their belief in God. But that moment where part of their reality is shattered is just you know. So you can imagine for someone like Truman, it wasn't just part of his reality being shattered. It was his entire reality. No wonder he looked like a broken man.
Yeah. And I mean, for all the skeptics out there who would say, well, I would apply skepticism and I wouldn't be fooled by these things, how would you even start to begin to know you should be skeptical?
Yeah, this is an excellent question. I think this is actually the core of the issue to some extent, right? Because like, how do you what do you count? What do you start to see that counts as evidence for the hypothesis that you're being actually deceived, right? Like that's a very good question in my opinion in that scenario. And I think like part of it is actually connected to the mistake that I mentioned earlier, right? Because if you introduce all of these things into his life as completely normal, I think he wouldn't have gotten out of it, honestly. No. Because if you introduce these ideas of cameras being just a thing that exists, right? Like trees exist and like dogs exist, there are these weird things that exist that they're called cameras, and maybe you can even introduce, you know, ideas about how humans behave, for example, that they just go around the block sometimes because that's just a normal thing that humans do sometimes, if you introduce these things as normal, to some extent, I think he would have had very few things to go off of to start his skeptic journey, if you will.
Yeah. I mean, today, if you think about it, we have cameras on every corner.
Yeah.
Like CCTV systems everywhere. So today, that thing might not have held. Him seeing a camera is like, well, it's just a CCTV.
Yeah.
And they could be easily disguised as CCTV.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you could even have a bunch of drones flying around with cameras on. And it could just be people playing, and it's the current sport, but actually it's just filming him.
It could be birds, like weird birds, right? Like something.
There are people that think that birds are fake.
Yeah, but that's the point, right? Like, if you have the opportunity to completely shape someone's reality from the ground up, from his education to what his parents believe, to everything, literally what the society at large believes, I think you have like the power to really introduce some things that seem completely crazy from the outside, like these sorts of ideas, right? You could even introduce a different kind of living object, right? That these metallic things are a kind of different object, and some of them fly around and buzz, and some of them are just, cameras, and some hold them as pets, for instance. I don't know, right? You could make a whole load of stuff up, and I think you could get away with it, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, like you say, how would you even begin to become skeptical about any of that?
So if we apply this just to, say, the modern skeptic, who often claims, evidence will change my mind there. By skeptic, I'm saying that someone that identifies as skeptic, not necessarily acts in accordance with any form of skepticism, past doubting things. Now, how does this tie in with them? Because we often see the skeptic getting a lot of their knowledge from memes or specific sources that they've trusted over the years, because they've had some good information, but then they're starting to shell out specific bits of bad information, but they accept that over the real information because they trust this other source. So how does this skeptic start to actually do as they say they should do rather than what they are doing?
Well, that's the big question, isn't it? I mean, if evidence is what should convince you that something is true, all the evidence points to him, at least from his point of view, living in a perfectly normal world. Like Philip says, everything just is that way because he's been brought up to see it that way. So if you were another person in there with him, growing up with him, not looking from the outside, all the evidence will point to Truman being perfectly normal, being married, having a real job, living in a real town. So you would have to go with the evidence that it's not a TV show. And if you were to turn around and be a skeptic and say, well, none of this proves it, that's kind of a weird stance to take, really. And if you were to say, well, I just don't believe that, I lack a belief that this isn't a TV show. That kind of thing would seem kind of crazy. There is nothing that within that kind of lends to the hypothesis that it's not a real place.
Yeah,
unless you're looking in from the outside.
Yeah, but I think, maybe that's not entirely true. At least, when things start to break down, as we mentioned.
Oh yeah.
There are certain things, right, that get introduced. But again, these things seem surprising to Truman because he lives in a world that he deems to be sort of like normal, of course, but it's very much like the world that we would live in, right? So I think that's why the show did it to some extent, right? Because we can judge his situation from the outside as well now, because we can imagine ourselves being in that situation, and we would say, well, if suddenly, a light falls from the sky, that is weird, right? So we can sort of understand why Truman is doing this stuff, because he sees a lamp fall from the sky and he's like, well, this is weird, right? So we can empathize with him, because the things that seem weird to us seem weird to him as well, because he has been educated pretty much in the same way. At least it seems to be that way from the things that we have seen. So that's, like, I guess, a clever way to make it easier to empathize with him. But to some extent, again, like, I wish that there would be an experiment where this would be kind of different, because then you wouldn't be able to understand, for example, well, why doesn't he find this weird, right? It's obvious to me that he should find this weird, but maybe it's not that weird if all you've been up to that point tells you that this is perfectly normal, right? So yeah.
I mean, that's why if we speak about religious communes and things like that, and kids that are brought up in them, they're only given a certain slice of history. And it's doctored in a way that backs up everything about that religion, and they have no way to contest it. And quite often they're adults before they even, go out the walls of the commune. So they're perfectly rational in believing what they believe, because they have, all their reasoning skills can be put into the evidence they have, and all the evidence tells them, X is the case, whatever the religion is, whatever they're doing like that. And we can even say the same sort of thing happens to the online skeptic community as well. There's the constant hammering of memes that all say the same thing. There's the specific atheist shows that all say the same thing. And it's why when you present an argument that says something different to the memes and the show, that all of a sudden you get a really aggressive response, because you're sort of contesting their reality. That's at least how it feels to them, even though you're not really contesting the reality. You're actually showing, well, hang on, there's a little bit of misinformation going on here, or this is a little bit of an oversimplification of what's going on. And we can see how difficult it is for people in the real world, yet Truman hasn't even had that. His entire world is fabricated. And in fact, he's even given like a phobia to make him not want to even leave his
Can't
world.
Cross the bridge, can't go in the sea.
Yeah. And which, if he did one of those two things, I mean, the bridge was the access out of there. It's where people came when they went home from overnight. And and if he took a swim out, he'd actually get to the point where he'd hit the wall. So this particular phobia is what kept him in his reality and kept him unable to look at things in more detail. Now, we can also apply this back to things like religion as well. Certain phobias or just general fears come from leaving a religion or considering things. Sometimes you're not allowed to have doubts because that will mean you'll go to hell, or you're afraid of leaving your religion because you're afraid you'll lose your community. I mean, there isn't much that there in the way of an atheist community. There is an atheist community, but not in the same way as a religion. So you lose that support, you lose that sense of being. So you can understand why people might be afraid to leave a religion. And equally, you can understand why sometimes atheists do follow the memes as well, because that's what all the other atheists are doing. And we've all experienced when we go, well, hang on, that meme's not exactly right, being othered by the atheist community. So we can even see it from our thing. We're actually saying, well, that's not quite right. We're essentially the people jumping into the Truman Show going, hey, by the way, that's an oversimplification, or hey, Truman, this isn't real.
Yeah, and if you were one of those people, say you were a skeptic on the outside and you wanted to help Truman escape his false reality, just like If we imagine Truman as the Christian caught up in the Christian community, and the skeptic is the guy parachuting in going, this is all a fairy tale. If you were Truman in that village and somebody popped in and said, this is all a fairy tale, what would you say is Truman? You'd be like, what the fuck's going on? Especially if people came in and swept the guy away. You heard a news report of some crazy person having a breakdown. It's not going to get through.
Yeah, completely. So you can understand how this false reality was very much maintained, because it's hard to change a mind or consider things from a different perspective, even when, as far as we're aware, we're not stuck in a reality like Truman. Very, very, very interesting to actually think about this. In some respects, I know things were going wrong in Truman, but even then, it's kind of hard to believe that this was somewhat maintained. Sorry, what I mean by that is it's hard to believe that they didn't maintain things even further. I know for the story, obviously things had to break down, but if you actually consider it, like with how hard it is to change a mind, it's amazing that he actually really did start to really doubt things and go, let's look into this more.
Yeah, and on that note, I think we might look into it. Like, first of all, I have a question. Do you think that his portrayal of doubt and the way he got out of it, do you think that it was realistic? Like, in a sense that you could follow the same path that he did and make the same types of observations and inferences, I guess, to get out of that? Or do you think that that it would probably end up differently at the end of the day?
I think to some extent it would probably end up a little bit differently, simply because of how crazy he went.
Yeah,
they would have good grounds to come in and say, look, you're fucking insane. You're having a breakdown, which they tried to say to him. Yeah. But they didn't follow through with that, with saying you need to be hospitalized for a couple of weeks or anything like that, which I think probably would have happened.
And I mean, things keep breaking up further, right? It's not just like one mistake. You know, the further it goes, mistakes keep happening that are bigger and bigger. But yeah, I think it might be interesting to look into, you know, what exactly is the engine of his doubt, you know, and how that is supposed to work, right? Because like. The very first thing that happens in the film is he finds a light on the floor, right? And he finds that weird, and then he hears about like a rationalization on it on the radio, and he goes on about his day and stuff like that. And then a bunch of other things happen afterwards that we can talk about. But do you like what would be the reason that he starts to doubt, like in your opinion?
I think when the father comes back, that's the first step to saying, well, wait a minute, wasn't he supposed to be dead? So you kind of question that. And especially when he's used to seeing people being rushed off, like with the ex-girlfriend and like the father who comes in, oh, no, she's mentally ill. We have to take her away. And it's seeing the father kind of made him pause, didn't it? And if suddenly your father came back and you recognized him as the parachute man saying you were on TV, there's going to be a sort of, even if it's an unconscious clicking, there's going to be a sort of clicking there. And then because that seed of doubt is already in there, he starts paying attention to smaller details, doesn't he?
Yeah. Yeah, but so would you say that that the engine of his doubt is you know, finding inconsistencies or contradictions in the story that he's been told?
Oh, I see.
Is
Sorry.
this like, I mean, at a higher level of abstraction, like I'm all for, you know, analyzing the actual thing that happened in the movie.
Yeah. Sorry.
I'm trying to figure out exactly, you know, like an overarching sort of guideline, if you will.
I think there was contradictions that started appearing quicker and quicker.
Mm-hmm.
And because of those contradictions, it started making him pay more attention, and that made him see more contradictions. And that made him question the unusualness of certain things.
Yeah, also retrospectively as well, you know, looking back at all the weird things that happened. I mean, if those weird things that hadn't happened as a kid, you know, all the people that broke in and jumped out of presents and all of that sort of thing, I think he would have been quicker, having those things happen in the past obviously normalized certain aspects, which is why he seemed to accept them. However, when other things started popping up, he then would look back and go, what about those things? Because they were odd. It was explained and I accepted it at the time. And there are certain things that happen that make you readdress other things that happened to you in your past. Like, was I right when I did that? Or was I right to believe this thing? So I think...
Should I have put that guy in the wood chipper?
Yes. Always yes.
But yeah, I think that's a part of it. And there was a couple of other things, like he suddenly started noticing that there were people, like the wife, talking to nobody, especially when showing a new product.
Yeah.
Even if you were brought up in the environment where that's sort of normalized, once you've started seeing those other contradictions and those other strange happenings, you're going to start to think, well, hang on a minute, is that strange too?
Yeah, that's interesting.
I don't talk to nobody apart from when I'm standing in front of the mirror in the morning. So why are they having these conversations?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, maybe if they normalized it to some, like, this is coming back to the previous idea, right? Like if they said something like, you know, oh, that this is sort of like a thing that humans do, you know, just sometimes talk, like they just can't focus too much because maybe it's even unhealthy to focus too much, right, on someone when you talk to him. So every now and then you just defocus and look somewhere into the distance and talk that way. Maybe if that was introduced into him as a child, as an idea, right? Maybe he would have started to do these things, right? Maybe he would think, oh yeah, maybe I should do these things, right? Because that's how it's supposed to be, and it's not safe, right, to talk to someone for a prolonged amount of time into their eyes. So every now and then I'm just gonna, you know, defocus and speak into the wall or something, right? Then maybe this wouldn't have been such an issue. But yeah, I think maybe contradiction is a big one, right? Because you're told certain things about the world, but then they continue to break, right? Like, for example, yeah, father is dead, but father is not dead at the end of the day.
Father's not even father. Not that he knows that yet.
Yeah, but another thing, like, I mean, if let's say that this happened to you, right? Let's say that an accident happened to your father, and then you see him walk back to you like a number of years later. I don't think that you would question the entire world that you live in, right? Presumably,
no.
You would question that there is something that you missed about the accident, right? That's how you would resolve the contradiction, because, you know, your father cannot be both dead and not dead, so there has to be something that goes there. So the idea is presumably, I'll question, you know, the fact that there was something that I missed, right, at the beginning. So why go as far as to question the entire world that he lives in? That's I think a more interesting question. Like, for example, like maybe this is the better way to put it, right? I think certain things that contradict the way that the world is supposed to work are actually to some extent stronger, right? Because if you, for example, think that, or are taught that, you know, lights don't just fall out of the sky or something like that, it's not as much as I missed something. That's something that is harder, I think, to reconcile, because that's about the order and the nature of how things, behave.
Yeah, and that's another kind of point to bring up. That's a couple of other contradictions that kind of started triggering him is the rain. There's the scene with the rain.
Yeah, that follows him. Yeah.
And he's like, what the fuck's going on?
Yeah.
And then all the rain comes.
Yeah.
And that's not something he would expect to see either, because in the past it's always rained.
Yeah.
And there's also the bit where he's tuning the radio and he suddenly hears everybody following him. He's going down on. That would again make you wonder what the fuck is going on here.
Yeah.
And that would be a contradiction too, because this doesn't normally happen and these people are following me. He sort of thinks it's the police, but can never get a proper explanation for it. So it keeps his mind in that hyperactive, questioning reality state.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is maybe where we can introduce another sort of higher level concept to analyze this thing, right? Which would be one is contradictions, right? Like you're presented with contradictions and you have to resolve them. Okay, Joe. Thank you for your apt.
Sorry. I missed that. Sorry.
I just played with the eyes thing.
Yeah. It's so distracting.
It's like occasionally I'm just going to wind. Yeah, everybody does it to us whilst we're on stream, right? So I got to do it to you guys because
that's true. Yeah,
it's usually Icarus and Luke winding me up. So back at you.
Luke does that to me all the time. Not with the eyes, but other ways. But I think, contradictions is certainly one. There are varying levels of contradiction. One is just apparent, but you have to resolve them somehow. And I think a lot of these contradictions can be resolved within the world that he has built, right? Like even the lights falling from the sky, even the rain, right? You could rationalize it somehow that you don't know, like that maybe this is a rare atmospheric thing, that you didn't pay attention in school, and maybe you can even go to an expert, right, a meteorologist, and presumably they would tell you, oh yeah, this happens like a 1 in a million time, but now you're the lucky man because you were
have you ever had weird weather?
Rain.
Have you ever experienced weird weather yourself?
When we were in Penmine Mawr, we were walking up to the spar, and a line of rain passed over us. Like, just passed over us. And you could see the actual front of it coming, and it got us wet, and it went over us. Yeah, so it was sort of like in the Truman Show, but not following us. But it was literally just like a line of rain that went over us.
Oh, I never experienced that.
I've had a similar one myself. Except it was sort of like the opposite of yours, Dave. So I used to work in this pub, and it was like a 40-minute walk home. And I was walking home on the old split shift, and all of a sudden, and it was raining, and then all of a sudden I got this patch of sun for about, I don't know, 10, 20 seconds, and then it went back into rain. And I even stepped back, and there was this bit where it was just sunny there, and you had the rain before and after. It was absolutely crazy. But this walk was also weird, because quite often my watch would stop whilst I went through there. I had a mechanical watch at the time, and my watch would stop on the walk home, and I'd be like, God, I managed to get home in only 15 minutes, and it would be working again when I got home, so I didn't even think to do it. It was like, how the hell did I do that, though? Because obviously I knew the walk was 40 minutes, and I'd look at a different clock and go, that's very weird. And I would even talk to people who used to do that walk to the main town sometimes, and they would say, yeah, they've had weird experiences doing, along that road as well. It's really weird. So there's a collective experience of weird experiences going on, and you just sort of go, well, okay, that's just a place where weird things happen. But that's very much like the Truman Show in its regard. Like, what?
At the end of the stream, you're going to notice even more weird things going on.
was there some form of magnetic thing there that was causing your watches to stop and rain to just skip this part of the road? And what would that indicate? Was that a high powered camera? I don't know.
Yeah, it probably was.
Yeah, we're being watched.
Yeah, definitely.
By you guys.
Yeah, but
So on that front, my entire point there about have you experienced weird weather is the fact that it can and does happen. Dave and I have experienced inverse weird weather. He's experienced a patch of rain. I've experienced a patch of sun in rain. So it does happen, as you said, not quite as directly as it did in the Truman Show, but there are weird things that do happen to and can happen to people. So again, where do you apply your skepticism there? And if an expert does tell you, no, that's perfectly normal.
That's yeah. Especially because you can't look into all of these things yourself, right? Because suppose that they that they really did tell him like, oh yeah, cameras are just another life form made out of metal or something like that, right? Then if he becomes interested in biology and wants to study in that field, then you're going to have a problem. Because
they'd have to create fake notebooks. Yeah,
they're going to have to create all of that, and it's going to need to be convincing, right? Because at the end of the day, we know that breakthroughs happen in science, and that people, go, oh, this theory no good, right? Like we need to change things, right? So maybe he would be an innovator in this space, and he would just go at some point, no, these are not actual plants, these are something different. We cannot classify them in this structure. Or they would probably just discourage him as they did with everything that sort of
the Traveler and
exactly. But still, right? Like you risk. Oh my god, you risk doing these things and getting into these types of issues, I guess. But like to go back to the previous idea, like one of them, again, contradictions, I think, is a big one. But I think you can also think of it in a theory choice context, right? I think that this is where it starts to become interesting, and even a discussion on evidence could be very interesting, because you at some point start to have two theories, right, competing in your mind. Like one theory is that everything is fake, and one theory is that everything is as it appears to be to you. And then you have to start you start to compare them, right, and their virtues and merits and the things the downfalls to some extent. And I think it's to some extent easy to see how it starts to shift. I think that's a thing that is very well done, because you can explain most of the things in either theory, right? But at some point, it seems to me that one theory is going to have like better properties and explain more and in a better way that is more consistent and coherent without sort of ad hoc reasoning than the other. And so that's where things become interesting, I think.
Oh yeah. And as more experiences happen, because it's already going on in the brain that it's trying to process these two different things, as more and more experiences happen that seem weird, even though they might have seemed normal before, now that you're questioning it, the events that feel kind of weird will start tipping the scale of the one of the two competing the hypothesis.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And especially like there's the moment where the wife goes, something like, "Get me out of here."
Yeah.
I can't take this anymore. This isn't professional. Yeah. That would immediately make you go,
exactly.
Fuck.
Exactly. That is perfectly expected and this is maybe where we can talk about evidence, right? Because I think we all like to define here evidence as something that makes sort of a proposition more likely, right? In more detail, it would be something like evidence for a theory A, let's say, is such if it is more expected given A, then not A to some extent, right? So yeah, if you would be able to predict this sort of thing from your theory, and it is more expected given that theory, then that would count as evidence for that theory, as opposed to the opposite. So, the theory that everything is being faked essentially, and that everything is filmed, right? Perfectly explained. You would very much expect this to happen, right? On that theory, that someone would yell that out. But on the other theory that everything is actually real, it struggles a bit, right? It's a bit harder to explain these types of things, right? You could explain them, but it's a bit harder to do.
Especially if the whole of your past has been done in such a way that it's supposed to exactly resemble the real world, except for a couple of minor differences like the product placement or, it's just the whole town is made to resemble that kind of small town friendliness.
Yeah.
Which allows them to get those kind of product placements in without being questioned. But when something is extraordinarily weird, that will go into the other one like, okay, that's never really happened before.
Yeah. Even them, like the actors going around the block, right? Like you being able to exactly predict the order in which they will go and what will happen, that is not expected if you assume that the other people are just like you, right? Like a free agent that is walking around. It's completely unexpected on that theory, but it is somehow expectable on the theory that this is sort of all sketched out. So yeah, I think like all of these considerations start to weigh in favor of the theory that this is maybe all fake. Although you'd have to still calculate that theory is probably has a much lower prior probability than the theory that everything is actually real. Like at least based on your experience, I would assume.
And it's there's also the psychological power. I mean, even though it's got the lower probability, once you're stuck in that kind of mindset, like a lot of paranoid people kind of get into that mindset and see everything. And that's kind of what happened to Truman. And it started showing more and more like his paranoia wasn't just paranoia. So the psychological conditions also contributed to him getting caught up in it.
Yeah, definitely.
So just to recap, I mean, Luke mentioned something and I didn't see it in the chat. Going back to the weather bit, do you guys remember when the whole world went yellow? Did either of you see that?
Not that I can remember.
I think I did. Yes, I don't know if he means the eclipse that happened or something like that.
It wasn't an eclipse. So what it was there were storm clouds that basically came over from a desert. I think it was the Sahara, and it essentially turned everything sort of sepia toned, and it was just suddenly you looked out and you were like, "Oh my god, apocalypse!"
I don't remember that at all. I don't.
So
Luke was just on drugs.
I was at work at the time, and I was only on painkillers. So. And there were other people there to verify it definitely happened.
So here we have two hypotheses, right? Luke is on drugs and Joe as well, or the thing actually happened with the storm clouds.
I'm leaning more towards the drugs idea.
Yeah, me too,
Look,
honestly.
just because we were on drugs doesn't mean that it didn't happen, right?
That's
because
true.
you're paranoid doesn't mean you're not being followed.
Exactly. But it shows again, like sometimes these weird weather things happen. Now, obviously, we broached the experts thing there, and things came out relatively quickly because everybody was panicking, as you'd expect, to say what it was and explain what was going on. And I think this is another part of the experts side of things. Not only should we do our best to trust an expert who's an expert in the field, but you almost want a consensus view as well. So, I mean, if you're talking to a biologist about biology, chances are they are correct. But if it's backed up by other biologists in the field who say, no, this is all the evidence we have, there's this paper, there's that paper, so on and so forth, all of a sudden you've got this a lot more credible verification that this is the case. Someone like Truman might have been able to get a consensus of experts, but there's no way to know if these experts were actually experts. They're just people he was told were experts, right? They were actors playing experts, and he could have had multiple sources of experts, and how was he to know any different? And we have the flip side out in the world that we live in, where we have like a single expert who isn't an expert in what they're talking about. They're experts in other things, but because people trust them because of these other things, they trust them, on topics that they're not experts in. We see it with people talking about history and philosophy and stuff like that all the time. They don't actually know what they're talking about, but people believe them because they've already built that trust there. It's hard to break down those barriers, even if you can provide multiple sources from actual experts that contest them. So again, we can see the trouble that Truman might have had, because he's got a ton of people he knows are experts. He's got a justified false belief, essentially, which he doesn't know is false, and pretty good justification. For believing it. So yeah, it's when you see the trouble people have overcoming issues with these things, where because they trust someone as an expert even when they're not. In comparison to Truman, again, that's something else that's going to lock him into place. Now, there's something else you mentioned as well about predictions versus predictions of people. Every morning they were all in a stand-up position, so they all had a particular path they followed every single morning. Now, he had a routine as well, so he would get up every morning and do the thing on the mirror and all of that. And there are people who do have quite fixed routines. Usually you might see this person running outside at 8 a.m. So you might be able to predict behavior, but it could all be put down to routine as well.
That's true. Yeah, but there's a scene specifically where he's in the car with his wife, right? And he was observing what was going on for a while, presumably. At least that seems to be implied, right? And then he goes and says to the wife, look, this is what's going to happen now, right? You're going to see this car go by, or this guy go by with the flowers, then this other person, then a car is going to drive by, right? And he observed these people do the same thing, right, over and over again, just driving around the block, essentially, just going around and around. And that seems to me, it's not just about, the things that you do in terms of, having a routine and being used to doing certain things, right? It's just that the thing that they're doing itself doesn't make any sense at all, right? So it's just, a repeat movement that doesn't make
in that regard, you're definitely right. It went past being a routine into being a repeated movement. If it was a case that they did this thing 2 times a day, they did it every morning and every night.
Yeah, that would have been much harder. Yeah.
Because you'd accept that as, well, that's their routine. That's what they do. But you're right. When it's a repeated pattern like that, all of a sudden you're right. You break out of routine. Unless it's one person that just happens to be a bit crazy, at which point
that's true.
But the fact that it's everyone, it's a large-scale thing, that's definitely going to be something that makes you go...
Yeah, especially because it doesn't make sense, I think, right? That's the biggest thing, I believe, right? Because the thing that they're doing is not justifiable to some extent, right? It doesn't make sense.
They're not going to work. They're not a taxi.
Otherwise, they're just going around the block, right?
And
what did you want to say?
Well, when he compares and contrasts it to the rest of the world that he sees, where people do seem to be going about in non-regular patterns, that's what he sees and says, well, this isn't like everything else.
Yeah.
And he wouldn't have noticed it beforehand because he was kind of oblivious to the way the world was working because he was set in his routine. And it wasn't until he started questioning the hypothesis that there was something just not quite right.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, wait a minute. I'm now observing the world and spotting these things, comparing them to the rest of the world, and it doesn't seem to be running quite the same.
Yeah. Another thing that you could say, the inability to leave, right? I think that's also like not expected on the hypothesis that you're just living in a world where you can just go around freely, right? Especially repeatedly so, because he tries to do it in numerous ways, right? He tries to do it in the car, in the bus, with the airplane, and everything fails, right? For weird reasons, sometimes very weird reasons, right? So I think that's unexpected, yeah.
It is. And also, when he actually does manage to leave, like he gets the wife to hold the steering wheel, drives through the bridge, brilliant scene, gets across, and then it's like, oh my God, there's a sudden forest fire. Well, that isn't what normally happens. You don't normally get a sudden forest fire. Then he drives through, and it's just a line of fire. And he gets to the other side, and it turns out that there's a nuclear accident.
Yeah.
That, again, you'd be like, well, this doesn't normally happen.
Yeah.
And how come I didn't know there was a nuclear power plant just outside my town?
Yeah. Then the guy that addresses him knows his name. Right?
His name,
That's another thing. Like, how would you know? And it's, I mean, all of these are explainable, right, by the theory that everything is just, a normal, regular, right? You could say maybe he knows me. Yeah, it's a small town and stuff like that. You could explain these things, but cumulatively, I guess.
Yeah.
They make a strong case against that being the thing. So, yeah.
That makes sense, though. I mean, think about any belief you've ever changed. It's very rarely been one argument or one bit of evidence that has actually changed your mind on it. That argument or evidence might have made you go, well, maybe I need to think about this more and look for more. But it's usually been a culmination of things, different examples, and maybe some thought experiments and so on and so forth. So it makes sense that it's not until he's had a culmination of things that he's actually really going to be questioning these things. Because the odd thing here and there, especially if nothing happens for years, you just sort of, whatever. Eventually it just goes to the back of your mind and you delete it and you focus on what you think of as reality. Yeah.
And then sorry, go ahead, Dave.
I was just going to say, it's kind of like what Philip says with the cumulative case. All these things would stick in the back of your mind, even though you're not constantly questioning them, but they sit there. And as each new thing happens, it sort of brings the old things back and starts to add more and more to that sort of conclusion.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, I was just going to say, another thing that we can tie this back to is sort of our justification for our positions as atheists. There's no single argument that led us to these positions or keep us in these positions. It's a number of different arguments that seem to be more justifiable, more reasonable. Like you said, you've got your two theories that either a God exists or a God doesn't exist. Now, you might be on the fence with that, or you might have other thoughts around it, but generally, you fall on one side or the other. And it's going to be a culmination of arguments, evidence, experience, and so on and so forth that lead you to that particular position, which is why we often find it when someone goes, well, just a lack of evidence. And that's the only part of someone's reasoning. We go, you don't really have a particularly rational position. But I think in general, people do have more than that, but they just don't talk about it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and lack of evidence can be a good reason to think that something is actually false, right?
Yes.
But it has to be more than that, right? It's not just about the lack of evidence. It's about the overarching framework, right? You'd have to argue other things in order to make it so that a lack of evidence would count as evidence for it being false, right? So that's the thing that I think a lot of people miss. Although I think a lot of people maybe intuitively think about it that way, they just don't express it in words, but they are in that framework where it would actually make sense. What they think would actually make sense. But another thing that I want to say about the film, the movie, is it's not just about making observations and then asking yourself, on which hypothesis is this better predicted, right? Like, would my hypothesis predict this piece of information? And how well would it predict this piece of information? I think there's a beauty in the way they did this, because he gets to a point where he can actually make predictions that he doesn't observe yet, right? The theories themselves enable him to make certain predictions about how the world will behave if they are true, that he can test, right? This is almost getting into an empirical status, right? It's not just making observations about the thing that I already see. It's about, trying to say, well, what would I expect to be the case if this theory is true, right? For example, right, if the theory is that I'm in this sort of like manufactured environment is true, then everything that I do that is completely unexpected, will cause certain things to go nuts, right? Like there are going to be weird things happening, right? Because that's what my theory you would expect if this theory is true, or like I wouldn't be able to leave, or all these things. So I can actually try to do these things, right? And if the predictions come true, that is strong evidence to suggest that my theory is actually correct, right? Because I was able to predict them in advance even, right? That's sort of like what happens even in science, with sort of relativity, right? Like you predict certain phenomenon and then they get discovered years later, but that is very strong confirmation that your theory actually is correct, right? Because you're able to predict this in advance.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see him kind of testing that theory all throughout the film. Like they're going into what's essentially the actor's headquarters, and he opens the elevator door and behind it is just like a casting room.
Yeah.
And he's suddenly taking a turn that he doesn't normally take, and all the cars kind of stop and reverse back, and it's so well done. Like you say, it's kind of subtle in the film. They don't say it outright, but if you're paying attention, you can see as he tests these different theories, and the testing of those theories enables him to predict more and more and sways him more and more.
Yeah.
It's when you think about it, there is a lot more to his justification as he comes out of things than just single focus points that say, right, well, here we go. This is why I don't believe. It's not just because someone has said something or one weird thing's happened. It's, again, like we were saying, it's a culmination of a number of different things that led up to this end result. And I wonder, I mean, I know they couldn't do it, but imagine if he kept on trying to escape the way he did. And like they had the whole thing with the nuclear accident and things like that. What would they have put in for the reasons he couldn't get by the next time? If it was again and again and again and again, at what point would they run out of ideas to actually stop him from leaving?
That's kind of what happens at the end of the film with the hurricane as he's trying to sail away.
Yeah. Yeah.
They literally get him close to death before they stop.
Yeah. Yeah. But there's another thing I think that the movie hints at, right? Because when he tries to leave, it's not really about the problem is not leaving per se, right? The problem is leaving now in this very moment. Now. Yeah. Because essentially I think they would be able to successfully prepare in such a way that they would convince him that he actually went somewhere else. Or maybe they would actually let him go somewhere else, right? But they would cast the entire plane full of people, right? They would cast everything that he would do then in the location that he lands in and stuff like that, right? So it would, like, they would be able to keep this up. They just needed to prepare. They needed time. So that's why, planes were delayed for a month or so. And even his wife says to him, like, maybe we can go, right? But not now, right? Like, you say,
we'll go in 6 months.
Exactly, right? So yeah, I think there are certain things that would have gone differently, that would have kept him, because if he actually went to Fiji, right, or I don't know where he wanted to go exactly.
Fiji,
Fiji, yeah. Then all the doubts that he had would have vanished to some extent, I think, right? So I think that was a good thing to put in. Another thing that I guess would have been interesting, and I think another way that maybe they could have kept him in check to some extent. And you see this happening a bit, right? When, for example, he sees his father, right? And the first instinct from the mother's side is to tell him, oh no, that's just an illusion. Like, you just imagine things, right?
It's a doppelganger.
Yeah, it's a doppelganger, or you had a sort of a hallucination or stuff like that, right? But imagine even with the lamp, right, falling, right? And there are a lot of people around there. And then the lamp disappears or something, right? And he then asks everyone, if they saw the lamp, and they say no, right? Like, you would presumably start to question your own sanity, right? Your own perception even of things, right? Like, even if he saw a camera, right? In the same scenario where he sees a camera, right? There's some guy with a camera in the room, right? They could have orchestrated this, right? Let's put a cameraman in the room, right? A bunch of other people that he considers friends and family and stuff, right? And then he goes like, oh, look, there's the cameraman, right? And and they're like, what cameraman, right? Even though they obviously all see the cameraman, but they pretend like they don't, right? And then, like, I think that starts to introduce another hypothesis into the mix, right? Maybe I'm actually going crazy. Maybe I'm actually seeing things that are not there. And I think, given the fact that you have the power of the entire community and lifelong friends and lifelong family that are all faking it, I think it's not obvious that you would end up thinking, oh, maybe like all of these people are just in on it. I think you probably would actually start to think that maybe you're actually going crazy. Maybe you just, close yourself into a hospital or something.
Yeah. And I mean, it kind of started to go that way when he first started to question everything. Because you could see he was doubting his own doubts and wondering whether there's something wrong with him.
Yeah.
But like, it accumulated and accumulated until he realized, no, it's not me. Look at these things that I do, and I can tell exactly what's going to happen. That's not my sanity. That's something wrong with the world.
Yeah, flip side though, I mean, you could be hallucinating all these things. You could make all these predictions, and it could be your mind making them up at the same time. I mean, you'd still change your belief. You wouldn't believe that you were insane at this point. You'd see all of these things, but you could be insane.
Well, one of the things with that is we know these things from our experience of the world and from our experience of people who have these kind of mental problems. Whereas the world is perfect for Truman, so he doesn't see a lot of that, and he's probably kept away from those kind of ideas. So he doesn't see it as being something wrong internally. He sees it as something being wrong externally.
Yeah, that's another thing. Yeah.
There's something you mentioned though about going to Fiji. I mean, wouldn't they have had to have actually created a Fiji? A fake Fiji.
Maybe.
Rather than actually going to Fiji, because otherwise he might see like the Truman Show.
But you could rent an entire town.
Yeah, or island even, right?
Yeah.
An entire island and just, fake everything in there as well. I mean, like they mentioned that the whole film has a revenue of basically a small country or something like that. So I think they would have probably been able to afford something like that. Is Dave okay? No, Dave is frozen.
Oh no,
Dave's gone.
Hasn't happened to Dave in a while. Dave's not here.
Yeah, Dave.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, he's back.
Yeah. Sorry, I missed that.
And you've gone again. It's all Philip's
He's
fault.
back. He's back. Yeah, of course it is.
This is the Truman Show, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're just tricking me into that there's something wrong.
Yeah.
So yes, we were talking about. Philip mentioned that the revenue of the show was like that of a small country, so they could probably actually hire and secure an area so that even if they did actually take a trip to the real Fiji rather than a simulated Fiji that they have in a different studio, then maybe that he would be protected things. They could change the airwaves. They could control everything in that area and the people that he meets, and all the people he would meet in there would still be hired actors, and none of them would be doing anything. So yeah, I mean, there is a chance that they could do it, but that would be why it would take so long to prepare that sort of thing. Yeah. There are certain things I found troubling with the movie, though, was how long it was. I suppose it's his entire reality, and when you're looking at it from an outward perspective, it's easier to poke holes in it. But there's certain things like he didn't really seem to go on holiday from memory or anything like that. He was always living in this routine in this town.
Yeah, he asks his mum about that. Why have we never left the town? And she comes up with all these photos. And it shows him at Mount Rushmore and a bunch of other different places. And he looks at his photo books and he can see all these things. And that's when he notices another kind of contradiction that makes him question the reality, in that he sees his wife with crossed fingers when she says, "I do," or something like that. In the wedding photo, she's got her fingers crossed.
Yeah, that's kind of obvious. I mean, I don't know why you'd do that. If you're a paid actor and you're having a simulated wedding, why do you need to have your fingers crossed? I know it's a plot hole for the story, but it's one of those things about the movie that you're just like, well, that's a bit basic. Like,
yeah, but it's a 2-hour film.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, it probably would have worked as a TV series where each episode kind of slowly unravels the fabric and probably work better.
Yeah, even a limited series, but yeah.
Yeah. But, 2 hours.
I'm surprised they haven't done one yet, actually. Pretty much every film's being turned into a TV series. Why is there not a Truman Show limited series?
Because then everybody will realize that all real TV is fake.
I mean, but they weren't lying, though, right? To some extent, right? Like the first thing the movie opens up on is this idea that the Truman Show is actually real, right? That there is nothing fake about it. And I mean, there's certainly things that are fake about it, right? Like that's undoubtedly the case, but like it's true that Truman himself is real to some extent, right?
Everything within the context of Truman's experience is real, and that's one of the things that I really like about it, is that is the premise of contextual knowledge. Everything that you experience, what seems to be true, if there's no rational defeaters, then it would seem to be true for you, and you would be rationally justified in believing it's true. There's also a nice tip.
Oh no. We've lost Dave again.
We've lost Dave again.
I wonder if he's... Yeah, so last week he decided to connect to a VPN to see if it made the connection more stable, and he didn't have any problems. I wonder if he's forgotten to connect to the VPN.
The Falk has.
And oh my god, he's back.
Here we go.
So,
yeah,
Dave,
I'm sorry.
Dave,
we
did you
missed
forget
the last
to
minute.
Connect to the VPN tonight?
I didn't. Yeah, I've not connected tonight.
So it is actually... How weird. VPN should make things slower, not faster.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
Doesn't make much sense.
No.
It's the Truman Show. Yeah, so like I was saying, contextual knowledge, everything that he believed to be true, he had evidence for it to be true. So he was, within the context of that scenario, he was quite rational and had good reason to call those things knowledge. We might not. And there's a nice tip to fallibilism in it, because without those rational defeaters, he has knowledge. But as soon as he comes in contact with those rational defeaters, it stops becoming knowledge. And he accepts the new reality. He understands that he had no knowledge of anything before, and he starts to rebuild all that knowledge.
Yeah.
And I suppose it realizes it was never knowledge as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know.
But it would be daft to say that he didn't know that that was his wife.
Yes.
We might be daft in saying,
Yeah, from his perspective, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, this comes back to a lot of the conversations that we have, where people can be in a rational position when what do you call it?
a young Earth creationist is rational
Yeah.
in believing in a young Earth if that's all they've ever experienced with
Yeah.
the community.
And that can happen to many, many, many different beliefs that people have. There are so many things about our world, and I think that the suggestion that people are irrational just because they have an erroneous belief, or think they have knowledge that they don't, isn't necessarily the case.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah. Sorry, no, go ahead, finish.
No, I was just going to say, and I think it's some of the comments that you come out, not you guys come out with, but that we hear, where, you know, if you believe in God, then you're irrational and things like that. You're just like, but why? Why would that be the case? That doesn't necessarily follow. It's why you believe in God, the reasons you have, everything that you've had in your life that's built up to this. In the same way that why you are an atheist, you know, that you can be perfectly rational in that position. But I also think that there are some who are very, very irrational, even though they may be correct. I believe they're correct, but not necessarily rational. And I think there needs to be a split between correct and incorrect and rational and irrational. And people need to realize that they're two different concepts.
Yeah, that's a very important distinction to make. Although I will say that, like, if you can assume that a group of people is working from the same knowledge base, right, from the same data, then it can be reasonable sometimes to just say, you know, oh, you're being irrational on certain things, right? Like, because on the assumption that you share certain data points, right? It makes sense for you to say, for example, that there is, like, if you actually believe that there is no evidence for something, and you know exactly what he knows, right? You both know the exact same things about a certain thing, then it might make sense to actually call someone irrational. But it's harder to do if you don't know exactly their background or their reasons or all of this, right?
Absolutely. And that's one thing that a lot of people forget is, like, you'll have someone who becomes an atheist. They've been brought up in Christianity and all that. And they turn around now and say that, oh, well, any Christian who still believes is obviously irrational. And I had the same information as them, and I don't believe.
Yeah.
But it's not the case that they have the same information, because they have a different epistemic outlook now. And that's a major difference between the two worldviews.
Yeah, but it also, like, this is something that I've encountered before, right? Like, you tend to assume that everyone believes for the same reasons that you did, right? And then no matter the topic, right? You tend to assume that you're projecting your past self onto other people, and you're saying, oh, well, right, I was wrong. They believe for the same reasons I believed, so that they're wrong because I was wrong, right? So that's sort of the reasoning. But it's not necessarily the case that they do believe for the same reasons. Like I guess that in Christian communities, it's often the case that a lot of people tend to believe for the same reasons. But like I would say, there is a huge disconnect if you look at, for example, like in your average Christian and someone like Bruce or Rasmussen or people like those guys, right? Like there's a giant divide between the reasons they would give for their belief in God and your average Christian. So like to say that they believe for the same reasons is a bit. And Dave is gone again. It's a bit, yeah. It's not a great move.
No.
Yeah, I think we all agree with that one. So, Dave, what's the next thing we need to broach on the Truman Show?
Well, there's a couple of things. I just want to say one thing that sort of relates to stuff that's been talked about the last week, and that's being deluded. I mean, a lot of the people that are calling Christians deluded would probably say the same about Truman. He's believing all these false things. And if you believe false things, then you're deluded. But it seems pretty obvious that Truman wasn't deluded.
Again, he was saying that he's rational.
Yeah, exactly.
If he's rational, then how can he be deluded?
Yeah.
I mean, someone may have deluded him. You could probably phrase it in that way, but he is not a deluded person. He's not delusional
of himself.
Yeah.
And you get a lot of atheists who make this argument, who will say, well, if you believe in an imaginary friend, you're deluded. But that's not what Christians believe in. They're just phrasing it in such a way
to be condescending, patronizing dicks.
Yeah.
It's a straw man to some extent. Right?
It really is. But imagine if Truman believed that there was somebody controlling the world in such a way that everything worked out fine for him. Now, under the same things, he would be believing in an imaginary friend, but he wouldn't be being deluded.
No, because there really was as well.
Because there was, yeah.
Yeah.
But another thing that can be talked about with the Truman Show is ethics.
Oh, yeah.
Not just the ethics of taking the baby and putting him in the show, but would it be ethical to watch the show?
Yeah, that's a very interesting one, isn't it?
Yeah.
I suppose it depends on which ethical theory you're going to apply to it, because there could actually be some arguments for it, especially under something like utilitarianism, if it's bringing the entire world pleasure.
Shut up.
For the sake of one person that isn't even aware that they're miserable as well, at least at the start. They're not, they're having a good life. It's a false life, but they're having a good life, and it's bringing the rest of the world pleasure. A few people are grumpy about it, but most people are happy. So under utilitarianism, you can actually say that the Truman Show was a moral thing. Yes, I've won our debate that we haven't even had yet.
No, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you still have to take into account the direct suffering that you're causing to the person that's, having it happen to. Even though it's creating all this pleasure, you're still causing this suffering, even if he doesn't understand it. And you're also still kind of violating rights.
Yeah,
and
you're
you can
definitely
still have
violating
rights theory
rights
within utilitarianism.
Yeah, you can. You have to bit of a blend. But I mean, he wasn't really suffering, was he? He wasn't really suffering. Not until he was aware of what was going on. He was actually having a good life. He was happy. He just didn't know it was false. So he wasn't
fucking knew it.
The other thing,
the exact same words I imagined coming from your mouth at the beginning of the stream. Like I was like, yeah, and then we're gonna talk about this, and then I know that I'm gonna have to defend utilitarianism, and I'm gonna have a hard time defending utilitarianism. So yeah,
it's all right. We know you can't do it.
Oh yeah, I can. I will.
Well, I mean, you could go with the negative utilitarianism, where the point is to cause as little suffering as possible, And you're actually causing suffering. So
yeah, but I quite like as well to explain certain other things that we deem to be desirable, like rights, right? I think they're sort of reducible to utilitarianism to some extent. At least I like to argue for that. I'm not as well informed, but I like to argue that they are reducible to utilitarianism, much in the same way that you would expect, for example, at least you both would probably expect that consciousness is reducible to the physical, right? In the same way I would argue that the sort of higher order goods like values are reducible to sort of just considerations about pleasure and pain. So I do think that, for example, the idea present in society that you can violate someone's rights in that way, right? Take away their liberty and delude them in this way, right? If you introduce the precedent into the population that this is a thing that is okay to do, right? Because apparently in wider society it is accepted to be a thing that is actually possible and okay to do, that you're causing like immeasurable amount of suffering, in that you now have to live with this idea that you may be just put into a Truman Show yourself, right? And that would be treated as an okay thing to do, and Dave is frozen again. So I don't know if he's back.
Yeah.
So essentially, like the idea that it's okay for you to be in a Truman Show and that society can put you in a Truman Show for the pleasure of others is something that would ripple out into society as a negative thing and cause suffering.
No, and I agree with that.
Cause sort of psychological pressure. Like, if nothing else, because you wouldn't be able to argue against this type of stuff happening to someone that you care about, right? Because you wouldn't be able to have the precedent, right? Because the precedent is it's okay to do so, right? So when you want to object that, you want to have grounds on which to object. But if this is considered okay, then you don't. So now you're in a situation where you can actually allow these things to happen, and that's not a good thing, and that's why it should be rejected, even on utilitarian grounds. So yeah, that's my defense on utilitarian grounds.
Yeah, and do you know what? I even agree with you. It's like the whole the person who's the innocent that is lynched to give 1,000 people or a particular society pleasure, especially if they know that the person is innocent and it's just something they enjoy doing. Obviously, then all of a sudden there is that worry that it could happen to any one of them. Of course, the other argument is if they don't actually know that they're innocent and they think that person's guilty and this is just something that happens to guilty people, then there isn't the same sort of justification that could be made for Truman in that regard.
Yeah.
And the end sort of betrays the idea that they were watching it for pleasure, because every...
Oh God, it's really bad.
It is tonight.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
It
was working fine for like a couple of hours. Yeah. I think it's Joe.
It is.
He's got a button now that he's pressing just to cut me out.
By the way, I just want to say, I don't know if Luke left, but I have to say this. It's a terrible joke, but I just have to say it. Like if you see someone put pineapple on pizza, that's strong evidence that you're in a Truman Show, because that's fucked up shit. It's not normal. So that would be strong evidence that you should doubt your reality.
I mean, is this one of the things that never happens in Italy?
It's one of those things that is considered like a sin to do here in Italy, right?
Oh,
I've got to go to Italy.
I've got to go to Italy, man.
You're welcome. Always welcome.
It's barbaric to put pineapple.
Yeah, it's absolutely unexpected. If there wasn't some kind of tricky monster that wants that to happen.
So if I ever go to Italy,
is
Oh my god, please, I can't.
And there's
Do I have mod powers in this chat? Because that is too much power in my hands, people. Don't.
Pineapple on pizza is pretty good evidence for the evidential problem of evil.
Yeah, definitely a reason to reject theism.
Yeah.
Oh no, Gary. Oh, pineapple makes pizza better. It's a mathematical truth. No.
Just
to be fair, I mean, taste is one of those subjective things. People like what they like. I know people get really heated about this discussion, and I mean, I do too sometimes, because it's just one of those things that just seems so very, 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 very wrong to me. But then
people don't actually enjoy pineapple on pizza. They're just trolling actual pizza.
Yeah. I think so. I legitimately think so. Yeah.
Yeah, it could be the case. To be fair, the only people who have ever told me they really like pineapple in pizza know full well beforehand that I have a problem with it. And do you know what? Since I've gone, well, I don't actually really care if other people enjoy it. People tend not to wind me up as much. So no one likes pineapple on pizza. Excellent.
Not actually likes it. Believe it, only to annoy other people.
Yeah, like, and this theory makes predictions, right? For example, it predicts, or you would expect never to see someone alone order pineapple on pizza, right? If that's happened, that's the falsification of that theory, right? If someone that's actually alone and orders that, but like,
how can you see someone if they're alone though? Because if they're alone, you can't see them ordering it.
Exactly. You'd never find out, right? So at the same time, it would, because every time you would. Yeah, I guess
they'd have to make it themselves. That's what they'd have to do.
And you would have to surprise them. Yeah, you'd have to surprise them. But yeah, so that they wouldn't be able to predict that you were to come in. And if they're actually making it, that would be a good falsification of that theory. But I don't think that's going to happen.
And if you surprise them and they're alone and they have pineapple on pizza, you can kill them. Nobody would know. Yeah, so one less person putting pineapple on pizza.
It's never going to be. Like, I'm going to ensure that it's never going to be falsified.
Brilliant. Oh, question. Do they do spaghetti bolognese in Italy?
Yeah, so that's another topic for another day, I guess.
I hate it, actually. I really don't like spag bol. I don't mind like meatballs done with a decent sauce and decently made like fresh meatballs, but I don't actually like spaghetti bolognese. I find it incredibly boring. I just figured I'd ask. Dave, you're back.
Yeah, I'm just loading up the VPN now.
That would be a surprising thing if it actually works. But it did work last time. So
it did, yeah.
Don't read his stuff. Favorite. He's trolling. He's got to be trolling.
Yeah, he's definitely. He's letting us know on live chat, right? Like that's just. What evidence do you want more than that?
But you say supreme pizzas? No, in fact, if you go and find a super supreme from Pizza Hut, there is no pineapple on it. So an actual pizza called a supreme does not have pineapple on it, and that's evidence. And it's true.
It's something. Yeah.
Yes. Even though we could argue that, you know, a Pizza Hut pizza isn't a real pizza in the Italian sense. Sometimes it's just nice to have that greasy, nasty stuff go in your mouth. I'm really fantasizing about pizza at the moment. So I try not to eat them too often. Especially as around here, I haven't found a decent takeaway for pretty much anything. No decent curries. I mean, to be honest, getting a curry from Iceland is better than or making it yourself from scratch, obviously. But anyway, enough of my food woes. Sorry. You guys have got me really hungry, though. Stop talking about food, please. Especially not like food I really don't want to eat. You're talking about Hawaiian pizzas and spaghetti bolognese, and I'm still getting hungry, and I don't like either of those things. So we just covered off the nod to fallibilism before we went off on some random tangent. And so he would be justified in calling his position knowledge, even though after realizing after the fact that it wasn't actually knowledge, it was just perceived knowledge in that regard. I mean, fallibilism is essentially part of the things that's the basis for falsification within science. You know, science never really proves anything true. It basically goes, well, here's all the evidence indicating it's most likely true, and it hasn't been proven false yet. So for now, we will consider it true. And that's essentially the theory of knowledge of fallibilism in as few words as I can say.
Yeah. And
we were back on the ethics. That's where we were.
Yeah.
So you were just, that's what happened. You froze and we just went off on a tangent. So you were saying that right at the end of the Truman Show, it would seem that most people weren't actually watching it for pleasure either. So even in a really like basic version of utilitarianism, even then it wouldn't have been considered moral based on that.
Well, I mean, there were pleasurable moments that came from it, like him getting married, him taking his first steps and things like that. But at the end, everybody rejoiced when he escaped his prison, I guess, for want of a better word, because that's what it was. It might have been a happy prison, but people were more happy that he got out than being gripped by the story of what was going on.
People were basically watching a car crash. You know, they couldn't help but stare.
You could argue that him getting out was also part of the story to some extent, right? Like you could argue conclusion. That the reason that they enjoyed it so much is because it was like a satisfying conclusion to the story, not because they were thinking about him actually being free now. So maybe that's another.
So, I mean, in that regard, the people who were watching it, though,
exactly,
were they immoral for doing so?
Good question. That's a very good question.
I would say so. Like under pretty much any moral theory, you could probably argue that them partaking in the enjoyment of his imprisonment and partaking in a thing that helped keep him imprisoned and this environment that lied to him would be immoral.
So with the exception of people who tried to jump in and save him, most people's inaction is like the trolley problem where someone decides not to pull the lever and save people.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd be careful about that one. Though.
Yeah. It's sort of like buying clothes that you know could have been made in a sweatshop.
I mean,
you're not directly contributing to it, but it's probably better that you don't.
Yeah, but also about the inaction thing, right? Like there are quite a few popular arguments from Singer, I think, that you should sell pretty much all you have to give to charities, right?
Yeah.
And to some extent, I think he's correct in saying that. And I think that's what Joe was saying right now, that are you being immoral for not trying to break him out of that?
Yeah.
Are you being immoral right now for not giving what you don't strictly need to survive to people that needed to survive? That's a good question, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're necessarily being immoral. It depends on how much you've got spare. I know that I've gone through financial issues where I've had to cancel what I'm giving every month. I was giving to 3 charities beforehand. It was only a small monthly sum, but it was like a little bit because I had that spare money and I figured I should try and put some good into the world. And when I couldn't afford it anymore, I stopped. But I think it depends on how much someone has spare. So I could have used that money and put it in a pot and saved it for my child or something like that. There could be another use that could be justifiably as good, because you don't necessarily know how much of this money is going to go to the end result. But
yeah, but like
if you have a massive abundance, I mean, if you just think about like someone like Jeff Bezos or someone like that, I would say they would be incredibly immoral to have the amount of money they have and not end world hunger, because they could probably do it without it touching the sides.
Yeah, but here's the thing. It's very hard, in my opinion, to figure out exactly where that limit is. Because you can argue that a lot of things that you own you don't really need, strictly speaking, right? And if you can alter the thought experiment as well in different ways, right? You could think about, well, what if you could have the guarantee that by giving that money that you're gonna provide a child with food for like, say, a year or something like that, right? You have the absolute guarantee and certainty that you can do that, and yet you have things that you don't need, strictly speaking, to survive, right? So is it like, should you do that? Are you being immoral for not doing that? Because that's pretty much the scenario, right? You're being inactive. It's about the inaction, right, of not doing something that you presumably should be doing. And where is exactly that threshold, right? About what does it mean, to have something that you strictly need? Is it just about survivability? Is it about, being somewhat comfortable? And then what does it mean to be somewhat comfortable, right? Like, there are a lot of these questions. And of course, like, you can go to the extreme and say that the Jeff Bezos and other people like that. And I would agree, that it's problematic to have people that have like so much more money than there's this level of inequality. But it's a weird issue, in my opinion. That it's not I'm not exactly sure how to square it, right? Because it seems to be fairly straightforward that if these conditions are in place, then I think there is a strong case to be made that you should sell all of your stuff and help children that are starving or that need medicine and stuff like that. But I don't know exactly.
No, I mean, what you say as well, it's sometimes the example when you go to a supermarket, you go to the checkout or whatever, and they go, oh, would you like to round up your thing to the nearest £10 and, give and donate some money to this particular charity? And you're just like, you're a £1 million or £1 billion corporation. Why don't you donate to this charity? Why, what you're doing is getting us to put your money through you so you can get a tax break and end up not having to pay as much money out in tax. Whereas for someone like us who doesn't necessarily have as much money, it's a tight rope. And I
agree with you, but I don't think that it. Sorry if I interrupted you. Just finish the thought.
No, it's just saying that, like, there is a certain amount of. I get what you're saying. I think that with something like the trolley problem, it's a quick, direct thing where you are saving 5 lives like that, and the only thing it costs you is pulling a lever and obviously killing one person, but you've saved 5 lives quite quickly. Whereas something like donating to a charity, unless you had those assurances, if I knew that I could donate, a 10 quid that I've got spare and it would somehow give someone food for a month or something like that, and there'd be none of it going anywhere. A lot of the donations that you do give over, depending on where you're giving them, you don't exactly know where they're going. A lot of it goes into marketing and stuff like that, and it doesn't actually go to the person. So I don't think it's quite comparable to compare the trolley problems in action to not donating to a charity.
Well, yeah, I guess so, but that's because there are a lot of other elements that you don't know about, right? But if you correct for them, if you adjust the thought experiment to say that, actually you do know, and maybe arguably you could actually even say that sort of marketing, if that marketing is quantifiable, right? And you can say that if you give that money, they're going to use a portion of it for marketing, but that marketing is on average going to return more money to children, right, then you would actually, with your contribution, still save more children, right? You still maximize your ability to save children, essentially. So I don't know about if that about the marketing. Although I agree that if you don't know exactly what's happening, that it's a bit weird, right? But if you could remove that, then it would be different. Also about the idea that there's someone else that could be doing, for example, the corporation that has more money than you have, right? And they should be doing this first. I agree that they should be doing this first, but I don't know if that absolves you from doing it.
I don't necessarily think it does either.
The fact that there is someone else that is doing bad stuff, right, or even worse stuff, doesn't necessarily mean that it's okay for you to do a bit less worse stuff. Like, at least in my opinion.
No, I agree.
Yeah, I think our intuitions are a bit skewed sometimes, because the trolley problem, as you said, is something that is immediate, right? It's like you're there, right? You pull the lever and you have done the thing.
It's also something that doesn't happen in reality, really.
Yeah, exactly. But this is like further removed, right? There are multiple steps of separation from you to when you get to that problem that you're actually solving. But I don't think that distance per se is the thing, right? Like, distance seems to me irrelevant to some extent to the ethical issue at hand. And about the fact that you're just pulling the lever, so it only costs you the fatigue of pulling that lever, essentially, right? There are other experiments about the worth of stuff, right? For example, Alistair brings up the droning child example, right? I think it's something like, if it's from Singer, right? Like, if there is a droning child in a puddle, essentially, right? And you have your brand new shoes that you bought that are like worth 2,000 pounds or something, and you just bought them, right? Should you save that child? Should you just be inactive and not do anything, right? And presumably the obvious answer is that you should do that, even though you'll get your brand new shoes wet and potentially, actually, probably, let's say that you guarantee that they get ruined, right? Or that you can absolutely be sure that they're going to get ruined. I think it's still pretty obvious that you should save that droning child.
Yeah, because a life is more important than a thing.
Exactly, right? So that's yeah, but you could reason that way for pretty much every material object that you have in your home, right? To some extent, we could say, well, I could sell this thing and give that money to charity, and I don't necessarily need it. So if the analogy holds, right, that you donating to charity will actually save a child the same way that you pulling the child out of the puddle would save a child's life.
It's sort of the end of Schindler's List as well. Do you remember watching that? At the end of it, he was upset because he could have sold his ring and saved an extra couple of lives, and so on and so forth. I mean, what you're suggesting there is, you could get to a point where you reduce yourself to virtually nothing.
That's
to help others out. But I think there has to be an equilibrium that you have to start with a base standard of life. And yes, there are a lot of things that we have which are probably above that base standard. You could argue that you don't necessarily need a super fast internet connection. You could maybe you cut your internet in half and it would be good enough, right? The way the world works, you need internet now to be connected to everyone, to do your jobs and things like that. Like, you almost can't avoid having internet. I mean, if you want to get a job, quite a lot of the time they say go on the website and fill in the application form and apply. So there are certain things you need in your life. You don't necessarily need the best version of it. So you could argue that if you could live in a 2-bedroom house because it's your partner and, I don't know, a friend or a child or something like that, but you want the 4-bedroom house, you could argue, okay, well, no, you should have the 2-bedroom house. There should be an understanding of a base level to live in, a point where you're not putting yourself in too much displeasure. You should be able to have an enjoyable life.
Yeah, I think I agree with you in terms of like the intuition. I share the intuition of that, but I don't think I have good reasons to think that, to believe. Like, I tend to, like, I don't know if emotionally is the correct word, right? It seems intuitive to me that should be the case, that you should have this ground base floor of life that you're not going to go dip below, right? And everything else is sort of the thing that you're donating. But I think it's not easy, in my opinion, to defend this view on rational grounds. Like, at least I haven't found a way yet to really figure out how to avoid the problems and the apparent inconsistencies. Yeah, I think that's what Singer is saying as well, Alistair. Yeah.
He says, I think the analogy for Singer is that sacrificing a minor benefit for a great good, preventing something really bad, is what you ought to do. And yeah, I think that's right. You should probably sacrifice a minor benefit, but it's just, I still think there should be a level where you don't end. If you ended up selling all of your possessions to help other people, and then you ended up being a person that needed someone else to sell their possessions to help you.
Yeah, I mean, probably not to that extent, right?
Yeah.
Like that, I think that's a natural way to think about this, right? That you would.
Where does it drop?
Yeah, exactly. But I think like that's a natural breaking point, right? You don't go as far as to not be able to sustain yourself, but that's just a natural consequence of the theory, because you don't want to create another point where others need to help you now, right? Like, it seems obvious that if you want to increase the overall well-being in the world, that you shouldn't drop to the point where you yourself become like part of the issue where others need to help you now. But I think, like, for the rest of it, I don't know exactly where, like, how you could place, because like it seems to me that any limit that you're going to place, there's going to be good reasons to lower that limit, and I don't know just how you would place that limit that's not arbitrarily determined. And like the only limit that I could see that is not arbitrary is this idea of, just when you don't yourself end up in a situation where you yourself need help, because this seems to me justifiable, right? But everything above that is a bit weird in my mind. And like, when it comes to what Alistair is saying about sacrificing a minor benefit for a greater good, I think that's absolutely the case, right? Like that, I think but everyone would agree with that, right? That's the easy part to agree with. That
it's
minor
finding
benefit,
where is that line? It is where is that actual line where you don't need this particular thing as much as you think you do, and someone might really, really, really believe that they need. Go back to the super fast internet again. Because they're a gamer or a streamer or something like that, they might feel that they need this super fast internet, but actually they do need internet because it's their livelihood, right? But they don't necessarily need that point. And I think that is where you go. Yeah, they can save half of their money on a cheaper internet connection and give a little bit more out to someone.
Yeah.
But then, I mean, there's the other things as well. I mean, you've got to think about the overall cost of everything in your life as well. Quite a lot of people are almost permanently in debt. They have credit card debt coming up to their eyeballs, and they're mainly all of their spare money goes into paying this off. Now, this is a problem with a lot of people, in the sense that they've lived to excess and they're now in a situation where they can't necessarily pay it out, or life comes at them. They've had to change things, they've had to put money on credit cards where they might not have before, and they've got all these additional payments going out, so they can't necessarily help with their current life that they have. Now, saying that, well, okay, yeah, you should just sell your house and move into a smaller one and all of that. Yeah, maybe, but the amount of effort that would then go into selling that house, the money that comes off of it, it would take them at least 6 months to then be able to donate to this charity that you think they should be able to donate to now, because it takes time to make those changes. Now, that's not saying that they shouldn't make the effort and try and do it. And I do think all of us should, when we're able to, when we're in a situation when we are able to, do that sort of thing. But I think you're right as well. It's finding, where is that line? What is actually something that is a comfortable but not necessarily extravagant life for everyone, and where is that line and how can we try and get everyone? And I think that's another problem. That's a human problem with our attitudes and our emotions. We will begrudge others if they're not doing it too. But when you
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And obviously that will cause massive displeasure.
Yeah. No, I agree with, like, I tend to agree. I share your views on this, in the sense that I find it compelling from like an intuitive perspective that you shouldn't do these things, right? You shouldn't necessarily sell your house or go homeless or everything, like to give to charity and stuff like that. But at the same time, I find it really, I struggle to figure out exactly why that would be wrong, like why that is not something that you should do, or like are necessarily like compelled to do, because like the limit just seems arbitrary to me. Like that's the biggest problem that they have, right? Like any limit that you're going to set as the thing that, you know, you cannot go under, because otherwise you can't do that, right? What does it mean that you can't do that? It seems to me that whatever you're going to say that you can't do is because there are going to be some major consequences to that. You know, you might lose your job, you might lose your house, you might go homeless, you might do stuff like that, right? That's very unpleasant. But at the same time, I tend to think that if you're in a situation, right, like let's say that you have a house, right, and there is a child that is about to die, right, and then an evil wizard appears or something like that, or a good wizard, depending on your view, right, and the wizard says to you, right, okay, if I snap my fingers and I make your house disappear, that child is going to live, right, but it's your choice if you want to do it. Right? Do you take the wizard's offer, like that you're gonna just lose your house and go homeless to save that child's life? Because I think there is a strong intuition here on my side to say that yes, you should do that. Yeah, you should give up your house to save that child's life. But if that's the case, and you assume that charity is perfect, right? That there is no money, weird things going on, and it's actually doing the things that they say that it does, then it seems to me that you're pretty much in an analogous situation sometimes, and that's where things start to get weird for me.
I mean, there'd be an ongoing negative effect if you just made my house disappear like that. I've got a 6-week-old in the house. She would die. There not being a house, she'd end up dying. If I had no house, I'd have no money, because all the money is tied up in the house. So I see what you're saying, but actually there's more negative effects.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
That would happen out of it. If I was the sort of person who had a couple of houses and I could easily afford to lose a house and it not actually affect my family, it not in any way.
Yeah, but that's obviously, but that's the easier one, right, to do. Like the problem for me is that if you take the trolley problem, right, because a lot of people answer the trolley problem that there is no difference between inaction and inaction, right? To some extent, that's what the trolley problem demonstrates, right? That you're just as guilty for not, using that lever as actually doing the act of moving that lever. But if that's the exact same thing, then what you're saying is that all the things that admittedly are huge negative consequences, right? Like that huge negative consequences to your life, right? You would kill a child to obtain them. Right, that's what you're saying, because if there's no difference between just letting it die and actually killing the child, which is what the trolley problem supposedly demonstrates, then you're in a situation where you're saying essentially, yeah, I would kill that child to not have all these negative consequences happen to me. And that's something that I'm not necessarily intuitively like really keen on. That's something that seems really weird to me.
I don't think it necessarily says that inaction is exactly the same as action. I don't necessarily believe that it is, because in the first thing, you're not the person who tied the people to the
okay, sure.
There's also, with the situation with the house, there's a lot more consequences. I mean, if you were to tell me if I pulled the lever, then the person who I killed would actually have saved millions of people, and the 5 people that I pull, they're all they're all rapists and child molesters or something like that. We've suddenly got a bit more context, and okay, well, inaction is what I should do in that instance. Even though I would save more lives, I'd say there's more value to the life that would save more lives, so than there is to the 5 child molesters, because they would be doing immoral thing, bringing people a lot of displeasure, and causing a cycle of abuse and so on and so forth. So in the situation where you're talking about the house, there are a lot of negative consequences that will come out of that sort of thing. So I think there's far more context. And I think that's part of the thing. Like with the trolley problem, it starts off with a situation where you have no context other than the number of lives that you save. So it's a lot easier to answer and make statements like inaction is a form of action. You're aware of the problem, and you could save 5 lives, but you choose not to. It doesn't cost you anything in that regard either, other than you could technically say that you're accountable for that one person dying. And I'm sure that would bring you displeasure to know that you've done that. But it's a lot easier to make the argument for why you would pull the lever than your house disappearing and all the negative consequences that come out of it. And I think you have more of a duty to your family and things like that than you do to a stranger. Why is it, whilst I do think we should look after each other, why is some stranger's child my responsibility when I've got 2 kids of my own, one of which who is very, very young, that would affect the rest of their lives negatively, and possibly if we've got nowhere to sleep tonight, especially with how cold it is, cause her to die. At the end of the day, it's you have a duty to your family over and above someone else. So essentially, the problem you're giving me is I have to choose the life of someone else's child or my life. That's what the problem, or my child. So that's what that problem that you gave me about my house disappearing from the wizard who would save this random child, that's what it ends up reducing to.
I don't think that it does, though. Like, I would push back against that. Like, the idea here would be, first of all, I don't understand about the comment about, who tied the people on the tracks, right? The fact that you didn't do that. I guess that there is a shared responsibility there, but I think like the trolley problem could work in the same way if you found yourself in a natural situation, right? Where there's like, I don't know, you could come up with any natural disaster that is putting the same kind of scenario in front of you, and you have the ability to intervene. And so like it doesn't even come up like the problem about, oh God, Dave is gone.
Dave's not here.
Yeah, I don't know. But anyway, like I don't see a good reason, for example, to think that there is a difference between doing versus allowing harm. Like I just struggle to find, like, I don't see what would be that. Maybe he's back. Is he back? Yes, he is. Can you hear us?
Yep, I've just gone back to the internal Wi-Fi. Can you hear me?
Yes, very well.
I'm not sure what's going on there.
But you seem to be okay now.
Yeah, I've missed like most of the conversation you guys were having. I'm really sorry.
Oh no, I was really
it's all right.
Curious to hear your thoughts.
Philip has decided that he is going to throw out utilitarianism forever now.
No, I did not.
Well, I caught that you were discussing Peter Singer and famine affluence and...
Yeah, we were discussing the idea that you should essentially sell your house or something to give the money to charity, right? That's what me and Joe were discussing, and that, for example, the distinction between allowing versus doing harm, if there is any distinction in that. I would argue there is none. But the things that you said that essentially it reduces to your because then, okay, just to recap quickly, I gave Joe, for example, the analogy, right? What I believe to be an analogous example, right? Like that there is an evil wizard or a good wizard, depending on how you see things, right? He presents himself and says to you, right, I can snap my fingers and let your home disappear, right? And if I do that, then the child that is about to die is not going to die, right? That's your choice, right? Would you do that? Is the question, right? And I would argue that in that situation, especially if you take that there is no moral difference between allowing and doing harm, right? That you shouldn't essentially kill the child to keep your house. I think that's a highly intuitive thing that seems to me to be clearly the case, that I wouldn't kill a child to keep my house. But then, like, I don't think that, Joe, the way you reduce the problem is accurate, because you said that essentially then, first of all, I agree that we have more duties towards our family than we do towards other people, for example. I think that's something that I share. But, like, I don't think that it crosses certain boundaries, like, for example, committing murder or something like that to protect your family. And I also don't think that it reduces back to the example that you gave, that you have to choose between your child and them dying, right?
Well,
because in that case, I agree with you. If that's what it reduces to, then I agree with you that you shouldn't sell your house to save that life, because you're essentially having a scenario where one child at least dies either way. It's just that, the one that you feel more like that you have more duty towards is the one that would end up dying if you sell the house. So I don't think that in that case you should do it, but I don't think that you necessarily need to go that far. And certainly I didn't picture it going that far. For example, let's say that I could guarantee that the wizard guarantees that the children don't die. Say something like that, right? Like, that's a simple way to adjust the experiment to fix that problem. But I also don't think that in today's society, it's easy for us for where we live to end up in scenarios where we would straight up die for this, right?
Yeah,
like, I think
but
there's
how would I
still
provide
assistance.
for them? They would have nowhere to sleep. All the money is in the house, so I would have no equity and be able to feed them. I'd still have a mortgage for the house that doesn't exist. There's a lot of factors in there, and it would have definitely a massive negative impact. How can you guarantee?
I agree. Like, that's my problem, though, right? Because I agree that it has a massive negative impact, and that's why it makes this whole thing so hard. Because I do agree that it's insanely difficult, right, to find yourself in the situation that you would find yourself in if your house just disappeared. But at the same time, I don't know. Like, would you kill a child if you accept that there is no significant difference between doing versus allowing harm, which I do accept? So it's maybe more a problem for me than it would be for you if you do think that there is a difference. But then I would sort of ask you why you think that there is a difference.
I do think inaction is a form of action, but okay, I wouldn't say it's necessarily as bad.
Why though? What is the thing that makes a difference?
Because it's not me actively killing someone, it's allowing them to die. Now, I think that in regards to the trolley problem, allowing 5 people to die is definitely worse than saving 5 people and killing 1, because you've got that additional parameter there of you've saved 5 lives as well. And so that's why that tips the scale. Now, if it was a case of one person's gonna, let's have a trolley problem where you've got one person on either track, right?
Yeah.
You either allow one person to die, or you flip the track, you save 1 but you kill 1. In that thing, I'd say inaction is the way I'd go, because one person's going to die either way, and in that sense, you've just allowed the person that was going to die anyway. Unless you have more context over who the people are, obviously, that would change things. But in a one-to-one sense, you're actively killing someone versus just allowing one person to die.
Yeah, but I don't see the difference. Like, I mean, maybe there are some intuitions here that are clashing, right? Because for me, like, in that scenario, it would be literally the same, right? If I'm in front of the lever, it would be the same to me if I could flip a coin, right? Like, the scenario. I think what may contribute to our intuitions being shifted is the idea that, there might be something that I'm not yet able to anticipate about the situation, right? That might be changed. Maybe there is this idea that if I actively do the thing, right? If I actively flip the track, then I don't know. There is something about the time in between the train being on the tracks and actually killing the person that fifths our intuition about what is going on. But as far as I can tell, if you're in a situation where you can have the guarantee, right, the written guarantee that you not doing anything will kill this person, right? It costs you nothing to do this, or actually going there and killing this person physically. I don't see there's any I don't understand where the difference would come from in these two scenarios. Because in both scenarios, you know that the person is going to die, right? If you're doing it, you're actually doing it to kill it. If you don't do it in a scenario where you know that it not doing anything would kill that person, it's the same thing, because you know that they're going to die and you're intentionally letting that happen. So I just don't see where the difference would come from in these scenarios. I don't know. Maybe it's just. Yeah, I suppose I just haven't heard any reason to think that they're I guess I shared perhaps the intuition maybe that there is a difference, but just thinking about it, I don't understand where the difference would come from. What is the difference?
Okay, make it a little bit more personal. There's a person who is going to be strangled unless you strangle a different person. Do you see the difference in actually strangling the person yourself than allowing a different person to be strangled?
So wait, let me just get clear on the example. So there is a person that is going to strangle another person.
Let's say, for example, right? There's someone in Dave's house right now, and you just happen to be in my house, right? And they say, right, they're going to strangle Dave and kill him unless you strangle me and kill me, right?
Yeah.
Is there a difference, right? Now, forget who we are, because we both know you choose Dave. But forget we are who we are. Let's just say you don't know either of us. You just happen to be in my house somehow.
Yeah. Consider they're true strangers, yes.
Yeah. So you've got no idea of the value of either person, but in one of them, you actively strangle someone, and in another one, you allow someone else to be strangled. Do you see the difference between actually doing the deed of strangling?
Yeah, I do see the difference, but I don't think that it's in the deed of strangling versus not doing that.
In both cases, the consequence is the same. One person has died. So from a consequentialist perspective, the consequences are the same in that regard, but the difference is you have actively done the killing yourself. So for the consequence is different versus allowing it to happen and doing it yourself.
Yeah. I don't maybe. I don't know. I feel that there is a difference, but I don't think that. Maybe what's throwing me off is the fact that there is a third agent in here, right? Because there are multiple things that have to be accounted for in this scenario, right? The fact that, for example, if you strangle the person yourself to save the person that is on the other end, that will set a precedent, right, in society, that it's okay for someone to strangle someone else if it is to save someone, like a third party that is being, I guess, threatened by a third party, right? And if that's okay, then I don't know if that has other consequences that ripple out.
Well, it's like Gary said,
broader.
There is the additional consequence that there is the psychological consequence on yourself as well. Now, you might have the guilt of allowing one person to die, but it would be a lot worse having to kill someone. And if it's a case of it's a one-to-one, giving yourself the additional psychological damage would be bad. And then from there, you could go on and could affect the rest of your life as well.
Yeah,
in
sure.
a negative way.
But like, I think. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
No, go for it.
I just wanted to say that if you do think that there is no significant difference between doing harm versus allowing harm, then the fact that you're going to have, I agree that psychologically you're going to have more harm if you actually do it yourself, right? But at the same time, I think that if you accept that there is no distinction, then rationally you shouldn't feel more bad for doing one than the other, presumably. If there is no external factor going on.
Yeah, but it is that additional factor of the psychological damage that you might do to yourself. You might feel better about pulling the lever to save 5 people. If it was a case of either let's change it again. You have to strangle one person, or 5 people are going to be strangled. You might find that a little bit more justifiable, and you still might have the psychological damage, but you might be happier than it being in a 1-to-1 scenario. If one person is going to die anyway, there is a difference between doing it yourself and not doing it.
Yeah, like I'm fairly certain that it would leave you like psychologically damaged, that it would leave you more psychologically damaged if you do it yourself than if you let it go, right? Like there's no doubt in my mind that this is the case, and I think that on these grounds alone, presumably you should not do it yourself. You should prefer it. You should let the other person die, essentially, right? In that scenario, presumably, if we're to take that this is the case, and I do think that it is the case. But if you remove this, I think it's pretty much a 50-50, unless there are some other external consequences that we are not calculating in this sort of scenario. And I do think that there might be other things.
There would be other, but for the sake of the hypothetical, there aren't. Then if you're saying there would be no psychological damage either way,
then it would be much.
I'd agree. I'd almost agree with you there. If there's going to be no psychological damage to you, is there any difference between killing someone yourself? Other than the fact that obviously it's then you committing a crime, but would we call that an external factor?
It probably would, right? Like that's another thing you'd have to control for all these other scenarios, right? Like maybe that's why it's easier to work with scenarios that are natural, right?
Just going to read a couple of comments out and take a break from the morality conversation.
I think we also deviated much further down this path than we initially wanted.
We're talking about Truman Show, and we're talking about Philip strangling me. We got kinky, and it's not even an end of month AMA. Sorry. The problem with. I'm just reading this one. Oh no, that's the wrong one. John from America says, is the difference from natural and supernatural, or what would be another word for supernatural? I'm trying to work out what that one actually meant. I think I must have missed half the message somewhere, John. Could you clarify that one for us? Trainwreck says, would it be better to have a few people suffer unspeakable tortures for many hours, or for near uncountable amount of people to catch some dust in the eye?
Yeah, that's a good one.
We were having that conversation the other day, weren't we? Was that when Alistair was on the stream?
Yeah,
Alistair's,
so.
yeah.
I think so.
I mean, from a consequentialist perspective, you can definitely make the argument of that the dust in the eye is the immoral one there. That actually the suffer unspeakable tortures for many hours could a few people, that is, could actually be the option to take there. But I think there's more things to take into account, because I don't think that you can really compare that kind of annoyance with the actual suffering from torture. So I would say that let's just say everyone throughout the entire history of the world gets a speck of dust in their eye, I'd still say that is better than someone experiencing torture. Even if it was just one person experiencing torture for a couple of hours, I'd still say everybody should get a speck of dust in their eye. Because I don't think that they're the same sort of thing. There's a lot more immoral stuff going on with torture than there is a speck of dust in the eye. But, I can understand arguments against it.
Yeah, I'm not going to defend this one because
I mean, there's a few answers to that one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when me and Alistair are gonna sort of argue for consequentialism, we're gonna destroy you all. And
it's okay because I just don't believe you. I lack belief in consequentialism, and therefore I don't have to defend my position, so I win. Yeah, I've got no burden. It's on you.
We just weren't convincing enough.
Yeah, and everything you say, I'll just say is word salad, and therefore it's not evidence, and therefore,
Yeah. It's all subjective anyway.
Yeah, that's true. We keep forgetting that, don't
we? On the Trainwreck also says, I think one can make an argument where your house, your computer, etc., have its worth more keeping for yourself for now, as in and the long run. Those things can help you generate more money to give than just selling them.
Oh, yeah,
that's sort of what we're saying.
That's a very good angle, yeah.
Yeah, there's a certain balance that needs to be had in this regard, and there are certain things. It's one of those things like, yes, I agree, you need your house, your computer, your internet connection, but you don't necessarily need the top end internet connection, and unless you've got a specific reason to actually justify this sort of thing, it's then saying, well, maybe you could argue that you should have a lesser internet connection in that regard and put some of that money into a charity, especially if you knew, like the hypothetical we were giving, like this charity is definitely going to do good.
Yeah, but don't you see that that's something that a rich person might say, right? Oh, well, I don't need the 5 million supercar. I'm just happy with the 3 million one, right? Like, because the 5 million one is super much, right? So it's such a, I don't know. The reason why I don't find this type of thing compelling is just because it seems completely arbitrary to me, like where you put the limit, right? Like what does it mean for it to be necessary?
It's a calculation. I don't think it's necessarily arbitrary. I mean, if we're talking about what you need, there is a certain minimum internet connection that you'll need to be able to connect to work and do a VPN.
Sure, okay, but what do you need for what exactly? Because if it's for survival, you need like extremely little things, like very few things.
I mean, life is more than just pure survival, though, isn't it?
That's the point, though, right? Like, because if on one end of the scale you have pure survival, right? Like, if on one end of the scale you have actually just lives at stake, and on the other hand of the scale you have, it's just more, it's not just about survival, it's about the rest of it. It's about the portion that is not counting towards survival. Then it seems to me that you have a bit of a problem there. And I haven't yet figured out how to solve this, even though I share your intuition on it.
I don't think we're going to get an answer for that one tonight.
No, we probably won't.
I did all this as part of my master's, and there was still no answer for me by the end.
So, yeah.
I do have some good papers on it, though.
Yes, always.
Have you read Hardin's Lifeboat Ethics?
No, I haven't.
That's a response to Peter Singer about how
if we know about it,
if we give all of our stuff away, so that we can help the poor people across the other side of the world, then all we're doing is shifting the balance over to them, and then they have all that they need, and we end up suffering, and then they have to give it all back. Sort of like, think of a lifeboat. A lifeboat can hold 12 people, but you could, at a push, get 14 on it. until it starts overflowing, and then who gets to decide who has to get out of the lifeboat, or everybody ends up having to get out of the lifeboat.
Okay, yeah, I haven't heard of this one before, but I don't know. It seems like I get what he's trying to get at, but like my first impressions are just that it seems fairly simple to figure out a solution to this, in the sense that you could just say, well, when it reaches an equilibrium status, then that's it, right? Then
right, but then that's the argument for when's the equilibrium with the house. Like, where is the actual equilibrium for our lives?
And not just that, how do you decide who gets to stay in to make that equilibrium when there's a whole bunch of people outside drowning? Do you have a moral obligation to bring those people in?
No, wait, maybe I haven't understood the analogy then, because like I thought that the idea is if we give all our money to them,
that's one part of the argument. Yeah.
Okay, I'm addressing merely the first part then, because like in that scenario it seems fairly easy, like to figure out, at least to me it seems fairly straightforward to see where that would stop, right? Like when they have as much as you have, then you stop. Right, that seems to be the.
But if you're giving all that you own except what you need, then you would shift equilibrium. Yeah.
Okay, sure. Then you would shift everything over, and then they would have to shift everything back. Yeah, sure. I guess that makes sense. But then it's just about figuring out. Actually, it's not even about figuring out. It's about predicting that if you sell everything that you own and shift it over, it's not going to solve the problem, presumably, right? So it's already predicting that what your action is going to be is not going to compensate that move, and thereby sort of making it sensible in a way.
Which is why there's an argument that rather than doing that, what should be happening is that we should be sort of setting up agencies that don't just give all our money, but we help set up these agencies that help go over and investigate what's wrong with the system, and then put better systems in place that help get them out of these things, though we do not neglect our responsibility to actually help them directly at the same time.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
But it is one of those questions. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
And like Pugge also argues that our actions through our voting for our governments also help determine how those people get help. So it's not just a case of giving our money, it's a case of looking at our own systems and how they contribute to the harm that is causing these things. And we also have to change our own systems as well.
Oh yeah, I mean that is part of the whole thing for sure.
Yeah, I think a lot of systems are broken.
Thank you.
Yeah. No worries. Hang on.
Sorry.
Okay.
Lewis asks,
if you
in the
get
example,
a cheap copy, get that.
Okay.
Lewis asks, in the example given, are we witness to the strangling? If so, if not, is there a difference? Yes, I'd say strangling someone yourself is still different to watching someone else be strangled, because you get to feel the life go out of them. As Alistair says, the psychological damage would have to be factored into the hedonic calculus, and I agree with that. In that particular example, there'd be a weighting there, and that could be the only. If we ignored all external factors, the key difference is how it would affect us and how that could affect us in the rest of our lives going forward. And
there's also a difference between moral responsibility. Like if through an action that action still happens, say the strangling, you've not particularly contributed to it, but you have contributed to not stopping it. Whereas the moral responsibility is mainly on the person who's instigating the actions. So there is a difference in weighting there. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't stop it, but you can also think of Kant's ought implies can. So if you can't stop the strangler, there may not be quite as much moral responsibility on the person who should be stopping the strangling.
Yeah. You can't stop the strangler, or you can't stop one person getting strangled. The difference is you either allow someone to be strangled or you strangle someone yourself. And if you go from Kant, then you've also got the additional problem of you've killed someone.
If you can actually.
Yeah. So that's a very long-winded way of saying yes, the viewers are immoral. What about, though, here's what I was thinking of, right? The people who jumped into the show that actually tried to disrupt the show. Now, we tend to think of them as trying to do the right thing, but they caused him potential psychological damage by doing it, or some form of trauma anyway. So by disrupting his entire reality, could we say that some of them were immoral, at least with the methods that they might have taken?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, because his... Oh, hang on, I might have to change my headphones in a sec. Yeah. He was leading a perfectly good life. He was perfectly happy. He was well fed. All of his needs were taken care of. And by jumping in and ending the show, he's now going to be thrown into the world and have to look after himself and defend himself. So there is kind of that could be seen as kind of immoral. But if you think of it in terms of having a duty to free somebody who's been kidnapped and enslaved, there is a sort of moral obligation that could be said to be there.
Yeah, I also think that, and it's weird coming from a consequentialist, I know, but the motivation of these people, of some of them at least, was like, oh yeah, I'm on TV, hey mom, I'm on TV.
Yeah,
like that, right? Like, so, you doing that for that goal, right? But risking the psychological damage of him and stuff like that might also count.
Yeah, they weren't doing it for the right reasons, so they weren't behaving morally by trying to free him, because they weren't necessarily trying to free him. They were
at least some of them weren't doing it for the right reasons. Yeah.
So some of them definitely had bad intent to go along with the disruption to his way of being. Some of them could have had good intent, but might have ended up with a negative consequence as well. So it could be that Truman can never adjust to the real world. And in that regard, his life could forever be awful. We don't know. We don't know what happened after the Truman Show. But from a consequentialist perspective, if him being freed from the Truman Show ended up with him being, I don't know, let's say a poor addict living on the street, or, just a worst case scenario type thing, we could say that even those people with the best intentions were behaving immorally. Now, I don't think that would likely be the case. I think the world would have actually looked after him. I'm just saying.
Guest appearances.
And how's it now? He'd be on the Ellen Show and Oprah and getting massive payouts, and he'd be sorted. I genuinely think that would happen. But I'm just saying, if it was a worst case scenario, even those with the best intentions could be said to have been behaving immorally, at least from a purely consequentialist perspective.
Especially if you take a weak consequentialist stance. Where it's just I think that's Nilsson's kind of consequentialism.
Yeah, I think there should be more to it, and I think most people who ascribe to a form of consequentialism see more to it than just pure consequences. My issue with consequentialism is pure consequentialism.
Yeah, I think most people that are consequentialists see morphing the consequences just as you tend to see more things than just pure atoms and quarks to some extent, right? Like I think that's the way, at least I would see things as a consequentialist.
Yeah, it's only the weak consequentialist that takes the immediate consequences to be the only thing that is important.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I wouldn't subscribe to that view.
Yeah, but that's the problematic view. I think it's something that definitely can't be fully justified.
Yeah, I mean, it's a problem for like other forms of consequentialism as well, because it's not as obvious to, like, you still have to find ways to reduce it back to consequences ultimately, right? So it's still a lot of work, but I think it can be done. Like I don't know.
Yeah. So, was there anything else we needed to actually cover off on the Truman Show?
No, not really. I mean, there's lots of stuff that could be spoken about, obviously, but those are just some of the themes that people could look for and help improve the viewing of the film and help them think about philosophical ideas a little more just by viewing the film.
Well, especially on the front of knowledge and skepticism and rationality. I think they're the main topics that we covered about the Truman Show. And then we covered off morality
and drowning babies and strangling people.
Yeah, but it wasn't necessarily related to the Truman Show. It was more us continuing conversations that we've had before. So I do apologize if anyone who's watching this and going, I feel like I've just come halfway into a conversation, because you very much did with that.
And I missed half that conversation going on tonight.
There was one thing that I wanted to ask, though, about the Truman Show is, what do you think it would have done to Truman's sense of self if his entire outside world was shown to not be true? How would that affect his inside representation?
That is one thing I was hoping to actually have a discussion about with identity and stuff like that. He would have to, in the same sense that Descartes stripped himself down and rebuilt all of his beliefs, Truman would have had to have stripped down his identity and recreated it. He would still have favorite foods, but how he sees his place in the world would be different, and he would have to rebuild that sense of self.
So he'd have a hell of a lot of work ahead of him. And I suppose that's why by the end he is quite a shattered human being.
Yeah.
You know what would have been even more fun to some extent and fucked up in another, if his internal world was, like, as we mentioned at the very beginning, like a completely different world to what the outside
what
world
he stepped out into. Yeah,
that would have been, because to some extent, you know, the things that he did and the way he behaved is not completely alien to the outside world. So I don't think it's a huge type of adjustment, at least not societal adjustment. I mean,
there'll be tons of new experiences.
There's definitely a lot of mental work to be done there, but from a societal perspective, I think he's not like completely, you know,
he can still
he can still partake in society and do all the things, because he was living in a world that is sort of a mirror. But if that weren't the case, that would have been interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, basically what happens is he goes from Truman, the insurance salesman with a wife and a house, to Truman, the reality TV star who is now an ex-TV star, and he isn't any of the things he thought he was, apart from being a good person or enjoying writing and things like that.
Yeah.
Sort of like a piano player losing a hand. He's no longer a piano player, but, you know, he can still rebuild an identity from it.
Yeah. I think oh my God.
My precious.
I see no actual substantial difference.
No, I guess the last thing that I wanted to say about it, I guess, is this. I think it I don't know if it demonstrates, but I think it makes you think about this idea that humans, like the hardware of humans, is pretty much the same and has been the same for a very long time, right? Like, okay, we evolved a little bit, but it's not nothing to speak of. So, like, when you look past into the past, right, and see people behaving in ways that you would consider completely crazy nowadays, and have ethical views that you would deem like highly immoral and stuff like that, it's a fun little experiment to think about the fact that, you know, all of that is very much probably a product of your environment, and the Truman Show shows how much of that is a product of your environment, right? So I don't think, like, I think it would help people to realize the fact that if they were born in a specific time period and live through certain things, you know, it's not unlikely that they would have ended up, you know, maybe supporting, you know, Hitler or something like that in the right context, right? Like, there's nothing about you yourself as a person outside of you, of the context that you were born into and lived through, that would prevent you from ending up there, even though, you know, it very much feels like, you know, there's some internal thing that, you know, you cannot get there, right? It feels completely alien. But I think people would do well to realize that there is like a very, very easy way to end up there, and maybe that's also making you think about certain things that you see today and how you accept them in sort of the product of your current environment. You know, what is it about the current environment that maybe makes it seem that certain things are okay, that perhaps are not going to be seen as such in the future, or something like that. So yeah, I think that's a very interesting thing to think about.
Awesome. Did you guys have anything that you wanted to add, or were there any more questions out there in internet land? Let us know. Did you have anything you wanted to add though, guys?
Just go watch the Truman Show because it's brilliant. And I really love watching it again today.
Yeah.
Probably Jim Carrey's best role.
Oh, I don't know. I liked him in Number 23 and Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind.
Yeah, but those are really good, and it shows his ability to act really well. But the Truman Show had him doing his comedy, but it fit perfectly and still felt like a serious role.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
I don't like his comedic roles, though. I don't think, you know.
I do.
He sort of was okay. I kind of like The Mask because he was that cartoon character and he fit that. But I wasn't a big fan of things like Ace Ventura and other things I've seen him in that I can't.
Me, Myself, and Irene.
Yeah, that was a bit.
I quite liked that. I thought it was clever. And the cable
guy was awful.
Right, that's it. I'm leaving here. It was fucking amazing.
Yeah, it wasn't. Yeah, man, didn't really suit me. I mean, maybe I was too young when I watched it.
Or maybe you just don't have a sense of humor.
And on that note, ladies and gentlemen,
goodbye.
Yeah, no more show.
One thing I will add on top, though, is like a lot of the skeptics out there who say things like, if I was born 2,000 years ago, you'd have been a Christian, but I still would have been an atheist, should take heed of what Philip was just saying.
Yeah. And by the way, like, sorry to interrupt.
No, go for it.
I just figured out that maybe someone who, like, I don't want to say that because you could have been in the same scenario that therefore it is justified what they did, right? Because, like, I don't like that argument. I just want to make it clear, right? It's not that, oh, it's not as bad because you could have been in that situation too. No, that's not what I'm saying. It's still just as bad, right? But it's just, I think, helpful to just realize that, you know, how much your environment is conditioning you, and just how easy it would have been for you to be in that scenario, and maybe it's going to let you feel more empathy towards like, in general, people that you deem to be completely like the worst people on earth. That's not saying that they're great people and justifying them, but I think it's helpful to figure out exactly how easy it is to slip in that scenario into that
Yeah.
scenario if you are in a specific in a specific time frame or like environment. Because like I think a lot of people genuinely tend to see like huge evils throughout history in not like genuinely not be able to figure out how the hell you could end up there. But
Yeah.
in reality, I think it's much easier than people realize.
Absolutely. Like, you can express something like World War II and being caught up in Hitler with the same as being caught up at a rock concert. I know there's a substantial difference between the consequences.
Yeah.
But when you're caught up in a crowd that all feel the same thing and they're all focused on this thing and you have this great orator in front of you, chances are you're going to be blinded by it unless you already have some reason to not be.
Yeah. And you've been brought up into a culture, into a family and everything that is sort of like building these thought patterns into you and the society at large as well. So it's like there's a lot there that makes it very hard to not see what's going on, at least from our perspective now, where we can see that was like one of the biggest atrocities in history.
Yeah. And for those skeptics who would think something like that, or just for skeptics who make arguments like religious people are deluded, religious people have mental illness, evidence, I'll believe stuff when I'm presented with evidence. Go back and look at the Truman Show, put yourself in Truman's place, and then wonder how skepticism will get you out of that.
Yeah.
And what your claims like, I'll be convinced of something if I'm given evidence. Think of yourself in Truman Show. Why would you want to break free from that then? Did Truman have a wife? He had all the evidence, but from the outside thing. So it's a good way to question your skepticism.
Yeah. It's a good way to make it more robust as well.
Robust as well, yeah.
That's the point, right? Because we're
Be
not
skeptical
trying to,
of skepticism.
Yeah, the problem, we're not trying to demolish skepticism. I'm a big fan of skepticism, but like it's helpful to realize how it works, right? Like why certain things are the way they are, and trying to figure out exactly how to be consistent with what you believe, right? That's a good exercise. It's not about destroying your skepticism and now you're going to become a theist again, right? Like that's not the point.
Absolutely. And that's one of the reasons why I picked this. And it's full disclosure, we had to watch this film and write a paper on it when I was in my undergrad. And we had to write an analysis of how it kind of correlated to skepticism and theory attribution and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and to be honest, we discussed a lot of good concepts tonight. I mean, we covered briefly on knowledge. There was a nod to fallibilism there. We spoke quite a bit about skepticism and rationality, and how he was very rational to believe this false thing, because that's what his entire world was built around. And just because someone is wrong doesn't necessarily mean they're irrational. And just because someone is right doesn't mean that they are rational either. So that's something to take away and remember, that there is a split between right, wrong, and rational and irrational. Rationality speaks of the way you reason, whereas the right, wrong actually speaks to whether the conclusion is right or wrong. And most of the time we don't absolutely know whether we are right or wrong. So the more important part is that we're rational in every position that we hold. Sorry.
Well, as humans, it's very unlikely that we're rational in every position that we hold.
Yes. Well, as rational as we can be.
Yeah.
Yes, and you're right. It's probably impossible to be rational in every position that we hold. There's a number of times, I don't know if you experienced this as well, Dave, where you suddenly remember something that you believe because you believed it as a kid, and you then go, I haven't actually ever looked into that to know. I've just accepted it because that's what I was told when I was a kid.
Well, no, I'm the only perfectly rational person, as you can see. No, I do it all the time.
Yeah, I think there are plenty of beliefs that we may hold that could be found wanting if put under a microscope, more than we'd all like to admit, because we all want to be super smart, rational people, and very rare that we actually are.
Yeah, as long as you keep the Dunning-Kruger at the forefront of your mind, you'll improve your rationality.
As long as you're not just keeping it at the forefront to project onto others, you're
Yeah. Like
you're realizing that it can
how it
affect you.
affects
Yeah. Awesome. Right. Well, as there's no more questions that have come in, Philip, did you have anything you wanted to add?
No, I don't think so. I'm good. Oh yeah, congrats to all of you for 400 subscribers. I think
all of us.
I mean, yeah, more or less.
Yeah, look, you're part of the woodwork now. One of us.
One of us.
Part of the ship, part of the crew. You can't escape it, Philip.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Always.
Nice one.
Yeah.
It's a smoking. I had to throw a Jim Carrey thing in at the end.
That just makes me want to watch Dawn of the Dead.
Oh, brilliant. But yeah, I mean, I know I've been a bit of a joker tonight, but I'm going to have far too much fun with this thing.
Is this our future?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay, Jasper Carrot.
I'm not that much of a wanker. Yeah, I am. Awesome. Well, thank you everybody who has watched tonight and has joined in the chat as well. It's been really enjoyable. It's been an interesting conversation. It's been a very different type of conversation for us because we've been analysing a movie, but obviously we've still been addressing the philosophical concepts within it. Please let us know if you enjoy this sort of content and anything that you would add or remove to it to make it more entertaining for you, because I would love to do another stream like this in the future, but obviously we can have the conversation ourselves if it's something that none of you are actually interested in listening to.
I've already got about another 20 films in mind.
Awesome.
And this fixes the Matrix podcast as well, because the topics are presumably like overlapping a lot in the two.
Oh, well, that reminds me.
What?
We forgot to talk about how the Truman Show could be considered resembling Plato's Cave. Because what?
Oh my God!
What Truman Show saw was actually the shadows of what was actually going on.
This is very true.
God. Yeah,
we've just basically missed the big one.
Yeah,
it was a pretty big one.
It was yeah.
Oh, and Mark says, I'm taking a day off today and I'm going to watch the Truman Show again now. Awesome, Mark.
Nice one.
Yeah.
Good one.
Hopefully you enjoy it. I'm definitely going to have to watch that one again myself as well. Hopefully the wife will be in the mood for it. God, I need to dig the DVDs out of the loft. Damn you, Dave.
Well, one interesting one could be The Village of the Damned, or The Children of the Damned, and discussing about hive minds and group knowledge. And
I've not seen that one.
Me neither, but hive minds.
It's amazing.
Knowledge.
Yeah.
Maybe we should do a watch party.
And then get cancelled by the copyright.
And we don't have to stream it.
Okay.
Yeah. Actually, all watch it together and record an audio track.
Yeah, we'll just watch it, and then right after we go live, like as soon as it finishes, we go live. We time it perfectly.
I'll be about 15 minutes late, as always.
Yep. Cool. Well, then in that case, I think that's us done for the night. And I guess we will see everybody out there Thursday. We've got a stream with Brina Rice.
Yes, very excited for that one.
I am.
Yeah, so we're going to be discussing power again. So we're carrying on from our stream about power, which was to do with the YouTube algorithm as an expression of power, and we're going to be covering off big content creators and power dynamics. from smaller ones to much bigger ones, but I don't want to spoil everything that we talk about now. So that is going to be Thursday's stream, and we've actually got a couple of streams already in the works for next week, suggested by Philip, and we're going to be covering things like
Dave suggested the Epicurean view of death like
months
a while
ago.
back.
Yeah.
So that's pretty much Dave's thing.
Seeing as I've got no memory of that, it didn't happen, so it's all you, Philip.
Okay, I'll take the credit. No problem.
Awesome. And obviously, guys, thank you for being here with me tonight as well.
And don't forget the Raven's Paradox.
Oh yeah, that's very interesting. Like, I don't know how much we can talk about that one, because I literally just know the thing and that's it. But yeah.
Well,
sorry.
I'm sure we'll get sent from one end to the other.
We'll just pivot to morality.
There's a nice big section in there on the Raven's Paradox. So
that looks like an interesting book.
It's amazing. It's all about paradoxes.
Liar's Paradox as well on the cover.
Awesome.
And the little raven.
Yeah.
But it's full of all different kinds of paradoxes, like Zeno and stuff like that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, God.
Excellent. I mean, maybe we just expand that one and have a discussion about
we should do like on every
general.
Paradox ever. Yeah, exactly.
And maybe pick a few of them, see how long it takes us, and we can address other ones in a future stream. This is not a paradox. Cool. Oh, well, there you go. Hopefully that's excited you somewhat, and it's been an incredibly long-winded me saying goodbye, so I'm just going to cut things off now and say see you all on Thursday, hopefully. So you've been watching the Fresh Air Sci-Fi Show. I'm Joe.
I'm Dave.
And I'm Philip.
And if I don't see you, good night, good evening, and goodbye.
That's a perfect way to end it.